I need to bring us together. Yeah! This isn't the plan.
No, Master Wayne. This is the team.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Batman Universe Specials. Today, I have with me a couple of our reviewers, comic reviewers, and writers over on the website. Let me introduce them before we get into what we're actually going to be covering here. So first up, we have David.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Hi, Dustin. Hi, Paul.
And we have Paul.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
All right. And today, we are here to actually talk about Justice League, and this is kind of our reaction episode to talk about Justice League, the likes, dislikes. We're going to be ranking it amongst the other DC films. I'll just put it DC films because they said that the DCEU is not an official term, so we'll just call it DC films. We're going to compare it to other DC films since 2013 forward. We're going to be talking about Easter eggs, the characterizations, pros and cons, all kinds of stuff, and then we're going to get into some of the controversy amongst that's kind of out there between the Joss Whedon supporters and the Zack Snyder supporters and things like that, and what we believe this film turned out to be compared to what it could have ended up being if things didn't change the way they did. So before we get into it, I mean, the first thing we really want to dive into is whether or not we liked or disliked the film. So we all obviously saw the film. Obviously, we wouldn't be here if we didn't see the film. But based off of your viewing of the film, whether or not you liked or disliked, obviously, there's no question that you probably had some issues or you liked some things, depending on whether you liked it or disliked. But let's start with David. Did you like it or did you dislike it?
Dustin, yeah, I definitely liked the movie. I have some criticisms of it that are quite sort of wide-ranging, but yes, I had a lot of fun with the movie itself.
All right, and Paul, what did you think?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. I mean, I definitely have some things that I wish they had done differently, and I do have my issues with it, but I smiled the whole time during the movie. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I personally also enjoyed it. I went in... I will be completely honest here. I went in with very low expectations, specifically because, running the site itself, that you come across so many headlines all over the place. I tried to stay away from as much spoiler stuff as I possibly could. And for the most part, I wasn't actually spoiled too much on the vast majority of things that could have been spoiled for the film. But it's very difficult to go in with a completely clear mind when you see nothing but headlines all day and you edit stories that have to get posted on the site talking about the issues that are happening with the films and things like that. So I went in with very, very, I wouldn't say extremely low expectations, but I did not have high expectations. Let's just put it that way. And I also went in very worried about what the end product actually was, based off of the news that it was going to be, just under 2 hours long. I was kind of concerned about that because, as we know, there's been plenty of movies in the past. Batman vs. Superman by itself was a 2.5 hour movie that they cut 30 minutes out when they released the Ultimate Edition that was over 3 hours long. And that movie had a bunch of problems with the plot based off of what they decided to cut out. And even when they plugged back some of that stuff, there were still some issues that were presented that still couldn't be explained within 3 hours. So I was very concerned about the runtime, especially with introducing basically Aquaman, Cyborg, and Flash. That was a concern that I had. And I went in knowing the Rotten Tomatoes score was sitting right around like 43% when I went and saw it on Thursday night. And I was very, very concerned about what I was going to get. And I left the movie actually quite happy. I was pleasantly surprised by what the end product was. I mean, I had also had issues and I had concerns with some of the things that happened, but I think the plot was very straightforward. Even in some case, actually, in my opinion, it was probably a little too straightforward. But I think that in general, the movie was an enjoyable film. My son and my wife, my son loves DC stuff. He loved it. My wife, who, she'll see the films. She loved Wonder Woman. She hated Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad. She left saying it was a very enjoyable movie. So I left very happy with what we got, even if I wished it was something more than what it was. I was still content with what we got. So talking about the movie compared to some of the other DC films. What I'm specifically referring to is like, let's compare it between Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, Batman vs Superman, Suicide Squad. Let's put it in the midst of where you would rank those movies. So obviously you'll have to rank where you would put all those other films, but where would you put this in comparison to the other DC films? Dave, go ahead.
Sure. Well, look, for me, this movie, and I should say, I felt it was lean, mean, and energetic. That's my little review of it, and I thought it lacked a sense of depth, but it had some heart and a sense of thrill ride fun. Now, I'd place it clearly below Wonder Woman, which I think is the best movie that they've done so far in the DC movies. I would have given that like an 8.5, Wonder Woman. This, on Signal of Doom, on my podcast, I gave it this movie a 6.5 to a 7. And I actually had a lot of fun in the theater. I would place it above the cinema release of Batman Superman. I enjoy Batman Superman. I had fun with it, and I liked the Ultimate Cut a lot. But I felt this was slightly better, probably, than the cinema release of Batman Superman, and I would place it above. I found Man of Steel a complete snore. I can't even remember it, really. And Suicide Squad, I guess it's below this as well. So it's second, but it's not a strong second for me in terms of a score. It's still only about a 7, but I did have a lot of fun with the movie. I just didn't feel it was particularly satisfying afterward. I woke up the next morning and it was almost like I could barely remember what I'd seen, but luckily I'd made notes as soon as I left the cinema. But I did have a lot of fun with it. It reminded me of a thrill ride. As you're saying, Dustin, the story for me was wafer thin, but it was paced well, and it had a simple plot, which was kind of engaging, so you got to the end of it, and I also wished it had been longer. I actually, similar to you, Dustin, I kind of wish I'd blocked out all critics before I'd walked in, because even though I was trying to stay off the internet, in the half hour before I walked in, all I saw were bad critical reports, and that puts you in a weird place. And I wish I would learn to just turn off my phone for 2 days before I go and see this movie, just so I could walk in completely fresh. I almost did for Batman Superman. For this one, I walked in with pretty low expectations, and it slightly exceeded them. And so I give it a 7 out of 10, and I think it's the second best so far. Paul, are you there?
I'm there.
Yeah,
I'm there.
Mate, go ahead.
So
yeah,
I liked it. I liked it a lot. I would put it behind Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman, I think, is the best that DC has put out up to this point. And what I liked about this is, like you said, it is lean, it's mean, it's very, very straightforward. It's very A to B to C. But what I enjoyed about it was that it I feel like everything else that DC has put out has been a bit of a deconstruction. It's been very much like Batman versus Superman. Like, we're not going to show the heroes as they are. We're going to put them through the ringer. We're going to deconstruct them. We're going to take them apart. And what I liked about Justice League is that it was very much straightforward. Hey, these are our heroes. These are our characters. Let's just tell a story involving them without completely ripping apart and turning on its head everything that we know about them. So I put it at number 2. Full disclosure, I love Batman vs Superman. I think it's great, especially the longer cut of it. And then after that, I'd say Man of Steel and Suicide Squad. I like them all. I've enjoyed every single one of them. For me, I went on media blackout a couple of days before I saw the movie. I just saw it yesterday.
Good man.
And I did that because there's a lot of the spoilers started coming out heavy on Twitter or else. And actually, one of the reasons why I'm glad that we're doing this podcast now is I actually get to kind of see what other people thought of the thing. I've been on blackout, but I had to say about it. But I'd say I liked it. I thought it was very enjoyable. I thought it was very much of what we all enjoy about DC Comics, and I'd put it at I'm not a weak number 2, but a medium behind Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you. I agree that Wonder Woman was the best of what we've gotten so far, and I would put this underneath Wonder Woman. Not, as you both said, a strong number 2 compared to Wonder Woman, but definitely, I'll be honest, I had some major issues with Batman vs Superman outside of the cinema cut. Initially, when it came out, I had a lot of issues, and I got to go to a special screening before the movie actually came out. And when I saw it, I was kind of like, I don't even know if I really want to talk about this. And I still had to go see it then a week later with my wife for opening night. And I just kept thinking to myself, man, I just knew that her reaction was not going to be super great to that film. But I had major issues with that, specifically the characterization of Batman. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that Ben Affleck playing Batman in Batman vs Superman was by far awesome. I was pumped to see that, but I think the characterization of Batman initially, and then everything else we got with the Superman stuff and the villains with Lex Luthor and Doomsday. I just was not a fan of it as a whole. Like, honestly, like putting a rating on it, even, and this may clash to what I gave it back then, but I think looking back on it, I would probably give it somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 3.5 to a 4 out of 10.
Ouch.
That's just where I would be. I mean, like, I actually enjoyed Suicide Squad more, but it wasn't because the movie was more in depth or the plot was that much better, because honestly, the plot was a little bit weaker in Suicide Squad. The reason I actually liked Suicide Squad more was because I love the introduction of all of the other characters that are, that never, and most of them had never seen a version of them ever make it into a live action film. And I thought that was really cool to see. And I thought that movie was fun. I mean, there was definitely, the villains were not that great, and I wouldn't say it was much better than Batman vs. Superman, but I enjoyed the idea of all these other characters being able to have a focus instead of just the main characters that we have seen so many times in the past, like Superman, like Batman, and things like that. So I would say, like, on a scale of 10, I would probably put it like a 4 to a 4.5. It's not that much better than Batman vs. Superman, but I think it's slightly better. Man of Steel, I honestly left that movie, and I just disliked that movie a lot. I went and saw the film, and on the way home, driving home from the film, I just went on this like massive 10-minute rant on the way home to my wife about that's not what Superman is. Why did they make Superman like this? I don't get it. Why did he snap Zod's neck? What is the point of all of this? I was really upset, and not to say that I'm the utmost respectable person to be characterizing Superman by any means, because I don't read a ton of Superman stuff, but what I have read in the past does not put Superman in that characterization that we saw. So when it comes to Justice League, I would put it below Wonder Woman, out of the 10 that I guess the scale that we're going on here. I'd put Wonder Woman probably at an 8.5, and I would put Justice League probably at a 6, somewhere in there. It was definitely a fun film. I definitely enjoyed a lot of the lighthearted moments. It didn't feel as serious as a lot of the other films that we saw. Wonder Woman had its moments of comedy too, but it still was a serious film. And but I felt as if the comedy that was in Wonder Woman it didn't need to be directed at Wonder Woman. Justice League, on the other hand, there was comments that like Batman made that were kind of like, well, that doesn't seem like a comment Batman would make. Or the one of the comedy moments that I didn't like in Justice League was Superman making the comment after he helps rip apart the mother boxes with Cyborg. He's like, I wish I was still dead. And I was like, yeah, no, you don't. That's a dumb, stupid thing to say. Yeah. But outside of that, I mean, that's where I would put it. So let's dive into some of the characterizations of some of the characters. So basically, there's a lot of characters in this film. So I kind of want to, and some of the characters only had brief moments of appearing, such as Commissioner Gordon, since Commissioner Gordon did not appear previously in Batman vs. Superman. So we have J.K. Simmons as Commissioner Gordon. Specifically, let's start with the Batman related characters. So we're specifically talking Alfred, Batman, and Commissioner Gordon first. Let's talk about whether or not you enjoyed those characterizations of those three characters before we dive into the League and the other cast members. So, David, what did you think of the TBU characters specifically?
Okay, I think they're a very strong part of this movie of Justice League. Going through them one by one, obviously we've got Alfred there, played by Jeremy Irons. Am I right? Always good. Always a good actor. Always solid. He's never a problem. He was classy. I liked his Alfred. Then we have Commissioner Gordon, played by one of my favorite actors of all time, J.K. Simmons. I know him so well as J. Jonah Jameson. And he was a little more goofy than I expected, but I love that actor's way of doing things, and it was enjoyable. I thought we'd get a bit more of Commissioner Gordon, and it certainly left me pumped for the Matt Reeves solo film, which I assume will have him in it. So, I mean, again, good. Then we have Batfleck. I think he was I love Ben Affleck in Batman Superman, and I thought in this he was solid, very likable. They clearly gave him more heart and warmth, and I thought, Batfleck rose to the occasion. I think in the entire movie, for me, he was the second best behind Wonder Woman. I thought Ben Affleck did a very good job as Batman, even though he's probably segueing out of the whole thing. Paul, what did you think, mate?
I thought, first of all, let's talk about Batfleck. I liked the angle that they took with him, where essentially he's a guy who's like, I know I've screwed up, and I thought that they made it lighter, but it wasn't to the point of, it wasn't Batman and Robin where he's not just throwing out jokes left and right. I thought that the humor that he did bring in, I thought it was very organic. Like even the "Do you bleed" moment, I thought that was a great moment, and it was a great callback to something that a lot of people had a problem with in the last movie. As for Jeremy Irons as Alfred, it's just more of the same. It was fantastic. I really like this take on the character where he's like the retired SAS guy who's just stumbled into working for Bruce Wayne, but so he's very much more of a partner in crime than he is there to polish the silverware. And I really liked it. I really hope that both with him and J.K. Simmons that they stick around. It looks like you said, Ben Affleck's on his way out, but hopefully they don't throw out everything after the. I would love to see more of this take on Alfred. And as for J.K. Simmons, I thought for what to do, he was fine. Like he was like, that's Commissioner Gordon. He's there to essentially to just relay information and light the bat signal, and he does what he needs to do. And I would love to see more of that character and give that character a lot more time to do more things. Also, a special shout out. I love that they threw Christmas Allen in there for a quick second.
Yep.
I always think it's a great thing when instead of just random detective number 3, they say, oh no, that's this character, and bring him into the world. So I think it would be great if they continued to do that. Like, let's bring in Bullock, let's bring in Montoya.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I think that Batman and his world were very, very, very.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I just let me touch on that last comment you just made about putting other characters. I will say that is one of my biggest complaints I have about these giant franchise films. When I go see a Marvel movie, I'm not as familiar with Marvel, so I can't criticize it as much. But when I go to a DC film and they have a character who, they have this massive library encyclopedia of characters that you could use, why would you just use Joe Schmo? There's no reason just to use the random Joe and say, hey, why not use some off the wall character that you're never going to actually get around to? Like one of it wasn't really a major complaint, but one of the things I was kind of disappointed in is in the beginning of the film, you have Batman not chasing down, but basically catching a robber. He's stealing silver out of somebody's house, and Batman comes and he captures him just to use him as bait for a parademon. When he catches him, it's just some random thief. It doesn't really make a difference who he is. But I thought to myself, wouldn't it be just funny? Not funny, but like it would be a kind of a cool moment to see some other character that you say like, not like, I don't know, like I'm just like some gangster or some low level criminal, like the name of the Penny Plunderer, for example, like that's who it is. And you don't know, if you know the comics, you know who he is because they reference him and like, they say his name and you're like, oh, okay. Hey, I know who that is. That's pretty cool because they're never going to make a movie about the Penny Plunderer. You don't need to, you don't have to have that character ever appear again. It doesn't make a difference. So why not do something like that and have the ability to do that? But it was cool to see Christmas Allen. There was a couple of other small moments here and there that popped up. Specifically, like in that scene with the giant battle between Steppenwolf and all of his parademons and the Atlanteans, Amazonians, the humans, and then the other people like the gods and the random Green Lantern that was there. I thought it was cool that there was a Green Lantern there. I'm pretty sure that was just there as a way to hint that the Green Lanterns exist, because I'm sure that the Green Lantern that was actually there was not somebody that anybody recognized. But amongst the group, they also had the gods, including Zeus and things like that, even though he looked much younger. And those characters, they do exist in the DC universe, so why not use them? But the Christmas Allen one was a cool call out. But it's one of those things where it's like you have so many characters you can use. Like you're never going to get like even if you make 3 films a year out of the DC universe, you're never going to get around to using all of the characters from this company's 70 plus year existence. It's never going to happen. So why not go the route of like doing, going crazy and just trying to figure out ways to assign characters. I remember when Marvel was making movies and people were like, oh, look at all the things that they did. And the ties. And then you see there's some characters who randomly appear in a very small role in one film. And then in another film, they end up becoming a much larger threat. Spider-Man Homecoming did that, where they had a lot of characters that were very, you just knew them, what their names were. But if you knew the Spider-Man characters, you knew that one was Scorpion. You knew one was eventually going to become Hobgoblin, I believe, was one of them. But the point is, like, it's one of those things where I like seeing that stuff. I like seeing the connections to the larger universe, because there is a ton of characters you're never going to get around to making a movie about. And to sit there and say, well, someday, 50 years from now, we might have wasted all of the characters and we have to use those. But that's 50 years from now. Don't worry about 50 years from now. Worry about creating a really in-depth, awesome movie that fans are going to appreciate. So, but getting back to what we were actually trying to talk about, the characterization of the TBU characters, I would say that Ben Affleck as Batman, I thought was great. I didn't have any major qualms. Going back to what you said, David, about or what you both said about the humor was in a weird way, like, in some ways it did come across as, would Batman really say this stuff? But a lot of his humor, I realized after thinking about it after the fact, was a lot of his humor was very snarky, which I could see Batman doing. Not so much just hee ha ha like the Batman Robin stuff that you mentioned, Paul. So I think that it works well to have, to have the humor, but still do it in that snarky way where it's not Batman specifically the only person who's doing the humor. A lot of the humor was other characters. Talking about Jeremy Irons, no issues. I felt like he probably maybe had a bigger role in the movie initially. It didn't feel like there was a whole lot in this film, but I definitely could see them giving him a lot more. This definitely does feel like the Batman Earth 1 Alfred, more so than any other Alfred we've ever seen, and much more so than the Alfred we've seen in the normal continuity of the comics, because like you guys said, the former Special Forces Alfred is definitely the way he's being portrayed. I know in Batman vs Superman he was flying the drone, so it's one of those things where I could definitely see that that's the direction they're going. It'll be interesting to see if that changes when they eventually get to the Batman movies from Matt Reeves. If Alfred has more of just I sit in the Batcave and I'm your backup that's back at headquarters, that kind of thing, because he can't, like, they also don't have, they don't have a Wayne Manor right now that they're actually using. So that's the other aspect of this, that somehow they'll have to resolve that. But there's other issues that they have where, if Bruce Wayne was to throw a party, could you see Jeremy Irons carrying around a tray with champagne on it for people? And I will honestly say, no, I can't see that at all. But I mean, like, that's not to say that the way they are portraying him is bad by any means. It's just, it's not the Alfred that I guess we're very associated to with the comics and things like that. This is very much, in my opinion, like Batman Earth 1. Now, J.K. Simmons, they did not give him a ton, but honestly, I don't know that anything was cut out from his side of it, because he has been saying for months that he doesn't have a lot of stuff in this movie. It was very quick stuff. I thought the stuff that they did have worked out fine, almost to a degree where, he shows up to light the bat signal. And when Crispus Allen asks him the question about, have you talked to Batman about this? The drawing looks like somebody that could be Batman. When all of that was happening, I kept thinking to myself, I feel as if they just had him in the movie so they could be like, hey, I'm the guy who flips the bat signal switch. And but it is Justice League. It's not a Batman film. I really hope that once the Matt Reeves stuff comes around, that they go in the route where J.K. Simmons has a much larger role. They show the GCPD aspect a lot more. I think, like with the Chris Nolan films, when they had Gary Oldman playing Commissioner Gordon, I think that his involvement with Batman was done very well, where the GCPD, even if they're at odds with Batman, they still have the GCPD involved in what's going on. I want to see that. And then you have the ability to have more Commissioner Gordon. I think his portrayal of the character was fine. No issues whatsoever. I just feel like there wasn't a whole lot to really base it off of, but what we got, it worked out fine. So moving into the other characters, let's talk about the main Justice League characters: Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, Cyborg, and let's leave Superman for the next topic here. But let's talk about those four characters and whether or not you thought those characters were done well. So, David, go ahead.
Sure. Well, first off, we'll kick off with Flash. I thought he was very amusing, even if they sort of slightly overplayed that angle. I mean, to me, he was the kid of the team, and he was there for the kids in the audience for the sense of wonder. He had, like, for example, a scene where he got in the Batcave and he's like, "Wow, it's a cave," and he was like running around. I'm not familiar with that actor at all. Other than his promo for this movie, and I was kind of like slightly apprehensive from what I had seen. But no, I really enjoyed Flash in this. He's by no means my favorite Justice League character of all time, but I just thought the performance was really cool, and so I thought he did a really good job. Then we have Aquaman. Look, I thought I'm a big fan of Jason Momoa from Game of Thrones, and like I liked kind of what he was going for, but I was kind of worried. Like all we got in the trailers was like, oh yeah, like a real kind of like that kind of surfer dude thing. I felt he was probably not serviced that well by the story. He had one really good moment other than just doing oh yes, which is when he sat on the lasso and you got a bit more backstory. I actually really liked that scene, and I think he's a really good actor, and I'm pumped for Aquaman the movie. But I thought in this film he was kind of constrained by the script a little bit and kind of put in a box a little bit. So, I mean, he was fine, but I thought he was kind of a bit restricted. For me, then obviously we've got Cyborg. I absolutely loathe the Cyborg character design of how he is looking. I'm not a big Cyborg fan in the first place. I thought this actor did a very poor job. I didn't enjoy his performance at all. I mean, I know he's trying to under-emote, but we were talking about this on Signal of Doom. I thought he under-emoted to the point of being invisible, and then he's also the central plot point. And I find Cyborg just a real grind as a character to begin with. So, yeah, and I just really didn't like his actual – I guess it's not really on the actor, but the technology for how he looked. I thought he looked ridiculous, frankly. Cyborg was definitely the weakest point in this movie acting-wise for me. Then we come to Wonder Woman. I thought Gal Gadot was fantastic. I think – in a lot of ways, she's carrying this franchise, and I thought she acted well. The script serviced her well. She looked fantastic. She ticked all the boxes. She had a good relationship with Batfleck. They had a good chemistry. I think the film needed that. And I actually felt that this movie, the performances, I know we're leaving Superman to one side. I think the performances inside the team were actually very strong, and it probably carried the weaker story material. The actual cast itself was very good. Even Cyborg, he did his job. I'm just not a Cyborg fan, and, you know, I sort of had to grind through that. But I thought overall that the cast did a really good job with what they had. At times they were constrained by the material. But I give a special props to Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot. I thought she was absolutely fantastic. Turning over to you, Paul.
I think that they did a decent job with giving all four characters their own moments and giving them each a little bit of time. I thought the Flash is primarily there to make the story a bit lighter and give all the funny moments. But it also did give, I also liked that the Flash is a little bit of an arc with everything where I love the scene at the beginning where he goes and visits his dad, and his dad's telling him to move on and stop visiting me. And he just looks at him and, I don't want to ever hear you say that again. I thought that was a really emotional moment that tells you a lot about and I thought it was a nice way of dovetailing that at the end when, look, I got a job. I'm trying to do something with my life. But he was funny. He was good. I've seen Ezra Miller in a few other things. And he presents in this pretty much as you figure he would based on how he's been presenting himself at Comic-Cons and that sort of thing. I thought they did a decent job. I mean, if you read Flash in anything else, the comics, he's not the rookie. He's not Mr. Hyperactive. I mean, that's definitely something that for some reason they've decided works in the movie, but for what it was, I liked it. I thought it was, as for Aquaman, or as I like to call him, Broquaman, I feel like I liked him. I enjoyed what he did. I think Momoa is a great actor and a good presence in the movie, but I felt, the one thing I would say is that I felt like they didn't really want to do too much with the character because he's got his own movie coming out. He's there. They make it very clear that he's sort of the reluctant hero, and that's as far as anything really good. Like, they give him that one great little moment where he sits on the lasso. But other than that, he's really just there to be cool. And I also can't help but wonder if he's kind of the response to like the classic stereotype about, you know, Aquaman being the lame guy.
I hope
where they make him like the coolest guy on the team.
Oh, I certainly think that's why he's characterized like that. Yeah, against the old persona, you know.
Which, in my opinion, if that's the case, that's really bad. Considering I remember distinctly when Batman vs Superman was being done, I remember Zack Snyder doing some interview in Entertainment Weekly talking about how one of his goals with bringing Aquaman into the DC universe with these films was to make it so that he wasn't the lame character that he was, that everyone just is like, oh, this is the guy who talks to fish. That's all he does. And he was going on and on about how, well, the water covers more than 75% of the earth, and he's the king of all of that, and that's a big deal. You need to make sure that that's a big deal. He was going on and on about how important Aquaman was in this interview, and I just feel like what we got here, I agree, it was definitely one of those things where it did feel like we can't explore too much of this character because that's going to kind of maybe mess with what's happening in his own film next year. I'm sure there was a mandate of some sort saying, hey, this is what we're doing in Aquaman. Try to stay away from touching any of these parts because that stuff's going to be explored, because we didn't really get a whole lot of his backstory. I mean, like, you learned about the fact that his mom was the queen of Atlantis before, and he's was never really part of Atlantis, and how he's basically an outsider, even though he's the rightful heir. And you see the brief tension between him and Mira, but you don't have a whole lot to go on because you know that for a full fact that it's going to happen later on in his own film. So I'm sure we'll be seeing flashbacks. I remember reading something recently saying that there are 4 different age versions of Aquaman that are going to be shown in his own film. So we can expect 4 different time periods of his life to be shown in Aquaman itself. So that's clearly why they didn't do too much. I do agree that I love the scene with him sitting on the lasso, though.
Yeah, like, I thought he was, like, don't get me wrong, I thought he was great, and just for the record, I like Aquaman, but it's one of those things where he just seemed to be there to be like, hey, look at how cool he is, but that's as far as they could go, and maybe that was a mandate, maybe that's out of respect for James Wan and what he's doing, but he was just there for the cool factors. As for Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, she was great. She's a very, very well cast role. I think she does a great job with it. They definitely, I think, are trying to bridge the gap between what they set up in Batman versus Superman, where she's cut off from the world and she's kind of tricked into kind of revealing herself, and she isn't sure she wants to be a part of everything, to now all of a sudden she's on this team and she's put herself back out there. I also like that they didn't try to shoehorn a romance between her and Batman. They acknowledge that there might be a bit of a spark there, but that's as far as it goes. They don't waste time trying to manufacture something that doesn't need to be there. And as for Cyborg, he was fine. They don't really give him much due. He's really there to kind of move the plot along, and that's really about it. They try to, it's funny, like they set up all these seeds about him feeling like a monster and not feeling human anymore and all these different things, and mourning the loss of the fact that he can't walk down the street anymore. But then they don't really do anything with it. It's just sort of, well, I've made it, so everything's fine now. But he was fine. I mean, I don't dislike the character of Cyborg. I'm kind of indifferent to Cyborg in general. I think that the character's really just kind of there to kind of move plots along more than anything else. And for what they needed him to do in this, and the mother box and all of that, but that's as much as out of all the characters, the least well served.
Yeah. So I'll start with Cyborg just because you ended with Cyborg. Cyborg, I feel they didn't have a whole lot for him to do, because I don't know that here's the thing. Cyborg initially was not part of the Justice League. They didn't really have, and I'm speaking for the comics, Cyborg was not part of the Justice League. He's always been part of the Teen Titans. It wasn't until just recently, back in 2011, when Jeff Johns brought Cyborg into the Justice League and made him part of the Justice League. You can come up with your own reasons as to why he was added. Jeff Johns has gone on record to say that the reason why he added Cyborg to the team was because in today's world, technology is such a prominent thing that you need to have somebody who is very efficient with technology, such as somebody like Cyborg. So that makes perfect sense in that regard. But the problem is when you don't have a story that involves too much technology, or you don't have a lot of moments that involve a ton of technology, you don't have a lot for him to do. And even when you do have technology, there's not a lot for him to do. I mean, there was a point where they come back to the Batcave to try to do research, and he just stands there sifting through the internet to try to figure out where it is. He himself is not really doing anything. It's basically the same thing as having like Hell from 2001: A Space Odyssey. He's just there. You can just be a voice. You don't have to actually have a being. you have to, like, in order to make the character more interesting, you have to play off the fact that he still has elements of being a human inside of him. You can't just play him off as he's all machine and he just has half of his face left, and that's what makes him part human is he's got half of his face left. Like, you have to do more for the character. And I think the thing is, it specifically in this story, it felt as if he was there because of the mother boxes and his connection to the mother boxes. It didn't feel like there was, if you didn't have the mother boxes, I'm not sure how much he would have been connected. He had some moments like taking over the Nightcrawler underneath in the tunnels when they were facing off against Steppenwolf and the Parademons, when they were saving the employees from Star Labs. He had that moment where he's like, Alfred, I got this, and he takes over the Nightcrawler. And then he also made a comment about how he could make the plane fly faster just by controlling it. I don't know how, physics wise that actually works out. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's what they had him do. Was he just basically was able to do some research for them and was able to manipulate their current technology into overperforming. But in other cases, they didn't have him do things like that. So, I mean, there's plenty to say, but obviously this is the introduction of a character that we don't know a lot about. They also didn't do a humongously great job of introducing each one of these characters, specifically Cyborg, Aquaman, and Flash, because they are all planned to have their own films in the future at some point, or were planned to have their own films at some point. Initially, when the initial slate for all the DC films was announced back in 2015, I think it was 2015. So when that slate was announced, it wasn't one of those things where, there was going to be a Cyborg film, there was going to be a Flash film, there was going to be an Aquaman film, and now some of it is adjusted. The Flash movie is now going to be a Flashpoint movie. We still get Aquaman next year, but Cyborg was initially on the schedule for 2020 and now is not on the current slate, but still have plans to happen. So it's one of those things where I feel as if some of these characters, maybe they didn't have the best introduction because, well, do you really want to explain the origin of the Flash or Cyborg or Aquaman in the Justice League film if they're going to get their own film after the Justice League comes out? And that's a problem because you're kind of working backwards in the direction of when comparing it to Marvel, you have the characters' introduction in their own films, and then eventually they come to be part of a team in Avengers. That makes sense because you obviously don't start with having them as part of a team and then go back to saying how they came to be. But Cyborg, you didn't get a whole lot. I mean, he was involved in some car accident or some sort of accident that caused him to get severely damaged, and then his father did some experiments on him. Other than that, you don't know anything except for he played football. You don't know anything about the character. Yeah. I mean, Aquaman, he likes drinking whiskey and he likes working with the people in that one little town in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like, you don't know a lot about these characters. I mean, you learn a little bit more of his history when he meets up with Mira, but even like the Flash, you have the situation where like he goes and sees his father. You have Batman and Wonder Woman talk about how the father went to jail for murdering his mother, but you don't really have any exploration as to how he got his powers. In the movie itself, it actually says that he's not a CSI. He's trying to go to school to become a CSI. So he's got his powers some other way than being in the crime lab and being struck by lightning, as the comics and the TV show have shown. So it's clearly different. He doesn't even actually have the name Flash yet in the film. So it's one of those things where, I feel like the origins for the characters were hindered because either the intent was you're going to tell the story in their own films, or you're just breezing past it because they're just part of the team and the only characters you're supposed to really care about is maybe Batman and Wonder Woman because you already got introduced to those characters before this film. As far as Wonder Woman goes, I didn't have any issues with her characterization. It was pretty online with what happened in the past in Batman vs. Superman. Wonder Woman, the only complaint I had about her character was in Batman vs Superman, they go in this big long shtick about how she's disappeared for 100 years and she stayed hidden because she didn't want to be involved in all of men's wars and all of this other stuff. And that was a huge complaint I had with the Wonder Woman character, because she is supposed to be a symbol of hope, just like Superman to a degree. And by just hiding for 100 years and not being involved in any way, doesn't seem like her character at all. In this film itself, they start off, the beginning of the beginning of the actual movie starts off with that sequence where there's a bunch of random people who are going to blow up the museum, and then the museum is going to blow up 4 square blocks or something like that, and she goes and stops them. Well, it's great that she goes and stops them, but she everyone sees that she's there. It's not as if they don't know she exists. So it's one of those things where if she has been out there helping people all these years, how come nobody knows she exists? You can't just decide to help people just to help people, but then never be around, and everyone just pretends like they don't know who you are. And then the other part of it is that at the end of the movie, she does go back to that symbol of hope. You see her stop a crime, and then she's out there with the children, just like Superman was to a degree at the beginning of the film, or what they were trying to aim for at the beginning of the film with the cell phone footage. So that part of it was, and they make a point to say, you stayed hidden all these years. That didn't help. That hasn't helped man by you staying hidden didn't help, even though it made no sense compared to what happened in the Wonder Woman film, because it contradicted itself. She went to, help men in Wonder Woman because of the horrible things that were happening. She wouldn't just say, you know what, I'm not going to do anything for the next 100 years. And Justice League kind of just reinforces that problem that was in Batman vs Superman. But hopefully the idea is just get rid of that idea by the time Wonder Woman 2 rolls around, and because that movie is rumored to take place sometime between World War I and the present, so it's still taking place in the past. You can't have a movie where she's just undercover as a person who works at a museum. It's just not going to happen. So,
Dustin, I've got something to your point there, actually. Gal Gadot recently, talking about Wonder Woman 2, she said they're actually going to retcon that section where they said she wasn't involved with the world. She sort of made some allusion to, I think they realized that was a mistake, that she'd stayed hidden for 100 years, and they intend to, I think, in Wonder Woman 2, retcon that basically as if that line didn't exist.
Yeah, and I did read that too. Yeah, and I did read that too. And it's one of those things where she knows because she's playing the character, and the mythos has been much more explored in her own movie with Patty Jenkins as the director. They have done a much better job with that character in their own film, where she realizes that idea of her just not being around for 100 years does not work with what Wonder Woman stands for. It doesn't make any sense. Exactly. So I think that's why she has gone on record recently to say that, is because she wants to make it known that, hey, she might not have agreed completely with what they did with this. She's been gone for 100 years. That was set up in Batman vs Superman before her own film came out. Justice League was already in motion before Wonder Woman came out, so they had to, they were just playing off of what they were doing in Batman vs Superman. So I appreciate the fact that she's gone out there and said, hey, listen, we know that's not the way it is, and it needs to be different, and we're going to change that because it makes sense that way. So going back, let's see, Flash, I didn't have any major issues. I completely agree that he did feel like the kid of the team. He's basically like the young recruit. As far as Aquaman goes, no major issues. Definitely the best scene was the scene with him on the lasso by far. And it just felt like outside of Batman and Wonder Woman, they didn't have a whole lot for the other characters to be, to really build up their character other than just having them as part of the team and as part of the solution of taking down Steppenwolf in the larger scheme of things. But it felt like there was a lot of things that could have been improved with their character by at least giving a little bit more introduction to them, since we didn't have the origin. There's a lot of people out there who complain about origin movies in general and say origin movies have been done so much, and there are characters who have seen so many versions of their origins. Well, we don't need to see origin movies. Origin movies aren't very good normally. They're not very good. You spend too much time doing that. To a degree, Spider-Man Homecoming, you kind of get past the origin story and just keep going. You just kind of skip it. You get that he existed, and you get a little bit of how he came to exist, but you move forward and you just go on. When it comes to the idea that these characters were all popping up in Justice League before their own solo films, I thought that the whole idea was we were going to see just real quick sequences of how they got their powers or how they came to be in some way, just so that you could just move on and their solo movies wouldn't have to be about explaining how they came to be or who the character is. And maybe the intent was to include that stuff, and it just was one of those things that ended up getting cut out of the film. But I felt like that would have made the film a little bit more better if you had spent a little bit more time explaining who these characters were, instead of just relying on the fact that a year or 2 years, or in some cases 3 or 4 years, or in an indefinite amount of time would be able to, you'd be able to finally figure out how this character came to be in their own solo film when it eventually comes out. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I would have wished more for some of these characters. All right, so let's move on to Superman. So the big thing about Superman, obviously, if you're listening to this, you've probably seen the film. You know that Superman came back. I don't think there was any question out there that Superman was not going to be part of the film in some way, even though the trailers made it seem like, well, he's definitely dead. And all the promotion was him initially saying, Superman in the film, of course he's dead. And even the trailers showing these scenes that seemed as if they could have been flashbacks, but turned out they weren't. It's one of those things where it's like, great on them for doing the marketing. I mean, the marketing for the trailers, I was really concerned initially that they were going to reveal that he came back, that he's going to be coming back. And I thought they were going to do it like months and months ago, like back in July, like when the trailer came out for Comic-Con. I thought that's what was going to happen. I was like, that's the same thing they did with Doomsday, and they should have never revealed that Doomsday was in the film. It ruins part of the film. So Superman comes back. He is, he's initially evil. Then he had, the key to everything, as Flash put in Batman vs Superman. I'm sure there was some sort of connection to that, even though they didn't kind of go back and show that. The key to everything was Lois Lane, to get him to get more grounded back to reality. And then he becomes good and he helps out the League. So the question is, what did you think of Superman's appearance?
Sure. Okay. Looking at Superman's, I've got to split into a few bits here, because I think Henry Cavill, fantastic actor, has been very poorly served in all these movies, at least up until Justice League, in terms of script. Now, his physical appearance, I mean, he looks great. He's ripped, physically great. The mustache thing was, I kept looking at him all movie thinking, why is Henry Cavill not looking like Henry Cavill? I mean, I'm quite familiar with Henry Cavill from movies like A Man Called Uncle, etc. And I just kept looking at him. And I'm like, what is wrong with him? There's something wrong with his face. And I seriously thought that the whole time. I'm like, has he really aged really badly in like the last 2 years? Didn't seem to mesh with what I was even seeing. I then realized, my co-host Stuart from Siggleton said to me afterwards, it's Moustache-gate. It was because he had the mustache from Mission Impossible, whatever number they're up to, 6, I think. And actually, it did impact on how he looked in the face. And I thought about it in the cinema without realizing. So that was a mistake. They should have paid I think Stuart made a good point. They should have paid the money for the stoppage on Mission Impossible 6 so he could not have actually had the CGI to remove the mustache, because it did hinder him a little bit. In terms of his character, I thought the scene with him coming back in the day was, I've got to be honest, one of the lowest points of this movie. I thought it wasn't serviceable it felt like the stakes were really low for what should have been a major scene, which is the return of Superman. I felt very, very underwhelming. It's not really on Henry Cavill as an actor, I guess, because it's the entire scene itself, but I was critical of that. Then, we obviously get Bruce bringing out the big guns, which I thought was going to be like a kryptonite bomb. Well, it turns out it was Lois. That actually was a nice reveal. And then very quickly, Superman is suddenly the Superman that we know from the comics. Now, I'm not a huge Superman fan in terms of reading him, but when I think of Superman, I like a bright, energetic, kind of full of, virtue Superman. That's what I actually like in Superman. And he actually became it. And I actually really enjoyed that. And I liked how they made the color pop off his suit a bit more. When they actually got the Superman, I liked him. I just felt the scene of his return was an extremely underwhelming scene that perhaps should not have been in daylight. It really felt cheap, that actual scene. I was very critical of it. That's not on Henry Cavill. That's on the directing. And I'd be very interested to know who directed that scene, if that was a Snyder scene or that was a Whedon. I don't know. Whoever did it, I thought it was a terrible scene. But Henry Cavill as an actor finally gave us, in a little segment, the Superman that I think we've needed and have kind of not had. And we're a very cynical audience in 2017, and a lot of people would have thought that Superman can't be bright and colourful. Well, I think what these movies have shown is people don't really respond to the dark, moody Superman in the movies. They want bright and colourful. We've already got Batman. We've got other heroes who are dark. Let Superman be bright and colourful. So I eventually think they got there. But again, I didn't feel that this script was fantastic, and the treatment of the Return of Superman I'd have to put down as one of the lowest points. I expected him to come back in a silver suit, at least a nod to the comics, and it'd be a bit more epic, but it was like he was kind of evil, and I enjoyed the battle with Wonder Woman, but the rest of it was a bit of a joke scene, and then suddenly he was fully normal with Lois. So I'm critical of the scene and the direction of it, more so than I am of Henry Cavill, who I think did a good job again with what he's been given. But I do wish they could have shaved off that mustache because it did impact on him visually for me. What about you, Paul?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think that Superman was that I think really, really worked. I think that we finally got classic in this movie. Like, even from the very beginning of the movie, you have that little Snapchat video they open the movie with. And like, even in that scene, it's like, it's Superman doing Superman. It's smiling a little bit, which is something that we didn't get in the previous movie. As for the mustache, yeah, you could occasionally. But it didn't bother me. It was actually turned into like a fun little game when I was sitting there watching it with my wife. And all of a sudden, mustache. We're going to call it out. I'm looking forward to the eventual Justice League mustache drinking game. I think we'll all be playing soon.
Yeah.
But I thought that the return scene, it was fun. It wasn't super dramatic. And I think that they were trying very, very hard to not quote unquote evil Superman too dark, because it's been clear that people don't like that. I will say that I'm glad you mentioned the dream sequence from Batman versus Superman, Dustin, because I think it's neat how they don't reference it, but they subtly reference the whole Lois is the key. Like they pay off that from the last movie without actually calling out that they're paying off that dream sequence, which I thought it's a good. I do kind of wish that if you're going to decide to make Superman come back a little different and have to take some time to become Superman again, I think you need to give that character time to do it. I mean, he meets up with Lois and then goes and has a nap and then he's okay. And I would have liked them to take 2-3 more minutes. You know, wouldn't it be great to see him like have a memory of him hanging out and getting some piece of advice from his dad or something like that on the farm? Just one little scene to really make him kind of remember what he's there to do and why he's there to do it. And then from there, he's just Superman. I thought it was great.
Yeah, so I would. So there's a couple points I wanted to touch on. You guys were talking about the mustache thing. As far as the mustache goes, the only time I actually even was paying attention and noticed it was in the very beginning, that cell phone video. And I knew going into it that there was going to be scenes where he had a mustache that was digitally messed with, and I thought to myself, the thing that like bewilders me about the entire idea of him and this mustache and Mission Impossible 6 is the fact that like in today's world of hair and makeup, you can't make a fake mustache. Why is the mustache that crucial to the plot of a film that he can't get a fake mustache for the rest of the film? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Studio politics, Dustin. That's all.
I know. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's just ridiculous. That opening.
I think that's more Paramount being a jerk about things than anything. There's probably some clause in the contract for Mission Impossible that says that if you want to shave your mustache, you have to ask our permission, and wouldn't give it.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. But it's definitely one of those things where I remember when they initially reported on it, like back in the summer, I was thinking to myself, what? You can't give somebody a fake mustache? I mean, like, how often do we see people with, facial hair in a movie and then they don't have facial hair and then, oh, wait, they have facial hair again? Like, we see that all the time. Why does it matter? But that being said, when the movie first initially started up and I knew going in that there was going to be sequences where they digitally took out the mustache, I was probably looking for it more than I needed to. And when they first started off with that cell phone footage, I thought to myself, oh my God, this is going to be bad. I don't know how much they reshot with Superman, but if this is what I'm going to look at every single time they show Superman's face, I'm going to have a massive problem with this. And like, in the larger scheme of things, that cell phone video, I think they could have just cut out. I don't really feel as if it was necessary. I get what they were trying
Agreed.
to accomplish with what they were doing. They were trying to make Superman that symbol of hope, so that when Batman references as Superman is that symbol of hope that we all, that we all need. When he references that later, I know that that's what they were doing. They were calling back to that video so that they could do that, because honestly, in the previous films, they didn't establish him as the symbol of hope that he needed to be. So they needed to add something in there to make it seem as if he actually is a symbol of hope and not a symbol of destruction and murdering his own villains. So the thing is, so the mustache thing, outside of honestly that first video, I didn't actually even notice it. And trust me, there were scenes where they were getting close up in his face, and I was like studying the screen as hard as I possibly could, trying to figure out whether or not he had the mustache or not. But I honestly didn't even notice it outside of that first video, which I feel could have just been taken out completely. Outside of that, the other thing that I really enjoyed about Superman was the fact that there was powers here that were shown that we didn't previously see. There was specifically cold breath. We have never seen up to this point in either Man of Steel or Batman vs. Superman that was shown when he uses the freeze breath to actually freeze Steppenwolf's axe, and then Wonder Woman chops the axe in half. That was really cool to see.
That was cool.
Because it was one of those powers where it's like, why hasn't he used it? I mean, like, he could have used that at a variety of different times in the previous films, but for whatever reason, they just chose never to use that power. So I thought that was cool. I also thought it was cool that they actually made it seem like he is just as fast as the Flash. Obviously, we have the post-credit scene, which we'll get into a little bit later, but there's the initial fight when he comes back and he's evil and he's fighting against the Justice League, and Flash is like racing towards him, and suddenly you see him and he just like he moves his eyes, and then Flash is like, what is going on? And then he's like, oh, by the way, I'm just as fast as you. And I was like, they've never shown that really either. Yes, he can fly really fast. Yes, they've shown him move very fast, but they have never actually shown how fast he really is. And by having Flash in the movie and being able to show the comparison of, hey, he's just as fast as the Flash, that was really cool to see. Because, and it wasn't just that one sequence either. You also had the same sequence where they're racing to save the citizens. That was really cool. And then the post-credit scene. So like they're showing that he has these other powers that for whatever reason they chose never to really focus on or explain in the past. There's actually sequences in Batman vs. Superman where if they showed the fact that he was super fast, there would have been giant plot holes as to why couldn't he have gotten there as fast as he did if he is that fast. So it's one of those things where it's like, did they purposely not show that he had that power so that their plot wouldn't get ruined? I don't know. I don't understand how you get away with not showing one of the character's powers, but it is what it is. The overall characterization of Superman, I mean, I didn't have any real issues. I did not like Superman in Man of Steel. I really didn't like Superman in Batman vs. Superman. Superman here, I loved it. I mean, if anything, if Superman had to die so that he could get back to being this classic, hunky-dory, all-American superhero, I'm fine with that. I think that Henry Cavill, from the very beginning, has wanted to do this version of Superman, and for whatever reason, like he expected going into Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, that's who he was playing. I remember reading multiple comments between last year and this year of him like giving interviews and people asking him questions about Superman. I remember reading a variety of things where he said, we're going to get to the classic version of Superman at some point. I really want to do that classic version of Superman. That's what I expected to do. And I'm glad that they actually were able to get to that point, because I don't want the dark Superman who's tortured by the same stuff that in some cases Batman's been tortured by. The world, his planet being destroyed is not something that can weigh on him, but he never knew anything about his world. It's like saying, going to somebody and saying, hey, by the way, did you know that you're adopted and the family that you previously had burned in a fire? You don't have any emotional connection. You don't have an emotional connection to those people. You never knew them.
Yeah.
So it's not something where you're going to be like, you're going to become this dark, grim character like Batman does because he's, 12 years old and his parents are gunned down in front of him. It's a completely different thing. So there's no reason you should have the character be like that. And that's exactly how the character was portrayed in Man of Steel and to a degree in Batman vs. Superman. So I'm glad that the character is very different.
Great points, Dustin, by the way. Great points, mate. I totally agree. Can I just say he doesn't even have Marlon Brando telling him about his past like in Superman 1.
Exactly.
You know?
That's the thing. Like it's mind-blowing how the character was characterized in the first two films that he appeared in. Outside of Superman, I'll just leave the floor open if there's any other characters that you guys want to just briefly mention that you thought, that you have any comments about, whether it be good or bad. Is there anybody else outside of the main league? We'll get to Steppenwolf in a second here. I don't really consider Steppenwolf a huge character in the film as much as I do a giant CG mess. But we'll get to Steppenwolf. But is there any other characters that appear that you have any likes or dislikes or comments that you guys like to make about them?
Can I throw out a comment? I've got two. First, what was the reveal with Crispus Allen? Because I completely missed it. I love that character. Where was that?
So that actually happened when they first introduced Commissioner Gordon. He is actually walking through the police department, and there's a detective who walks up to him and says, "Look, Batman, there's all these people who are being kidnapped by these weird creatures. A kid saw one, drew a picture of it. The picture looked like it could have been Batman, but it was really a parademon."
Oh, yeah.
And that detective was Crispus Allen. He was recognized as Crispus Allen. So it was very brief, and it was one of those blink and you miss it. But that's when it happened.
To be fair,
Cool.
I didn't realize it was him.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was him until I saw the credits.
Yeah.
I'd really like to see in Matt Reeves' Batman a series at some point them do the Crispus Allen Montoya, like them have a bit of the story, like a subplot or something. I really like those two characters a lot. My other thing that I want to draw attention to, because on Signal of Doom, my co-host Stu has taken plenty of shots at Amber Heard coming in to play Mira. Now, I find Amber Heard one of the most attractive women in the world, but I've got to say, Stu has often called her a beautiful shell. I didn't like her acting from what I saw. I've never seen her really act. I know that she was married to Johnny Depp for some time. Got to say that acting didn't blow me away, but she is beautiful, so maybe that'll be enough. So I'd be interested to get your comments, guys, on Amber Heard as Mira.
Amber, she looked great. I don't know Mira as a character terribly well, and she doesn't really get a lot to do. She's really there to convey a few lines of dialogue and a bit of information, and it's a means to get him the trident. That's all she's really there. And she was fine for what she was there to do. I mean, I'm looking forward to
She punched her lines, basically.
Exactly. Well, let's see what she does. And I don't think it's fair to really judge until she actually has a movie to really play the role in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year with the Aquaman movie. For what she was given to do, I had no issue with it there. They actually kind of forgot she was in the movie till you said something.
I never forget Amber Heard.
Fair enough. As for anybody else, I mean, no one else really had a lot of screen time. I was a little disappointed that they gave Lois Lane so little to do. I mean, she's there to serve a purpose, but other than that, she's really just there to kind of mourn, and I don't think that that's really Lois Lane, like the fact that she's not really working as a journalist and she's just doing these fluff pieces. I mean, that's not Lois Lane. So I would have liked if they had her more as a reporter out in the world, or why not send her to Russia? She's investigating something going on there, and that's where she runs into the parademons and all that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with that character that they decided just not to do. She's there to mourn Superman's death, and that's it. As opposed to everybody else, I mean, no one else really had any time to do anything. I mean, I think that it's nice that Diane Lane had a quick moment there, but that's really it. There was really no one else in the movie.
There's the family that are running away in that ridiculous subplot.
Well, speaking to Mira, I'll say this: I didn't have any major issues. I mean, I don't think there's enough to base off what we saw. She did not blow me away by any means, but Paul said, I don't know a ton about Mira as a character, so I can't sit there and say this is a good portrayal or a bad portrayal. I only have what I have read in the pages recently in Justice League, how she has been appearing in Justice League, but outside of that book, I don't have a whole lot to go off of as far as her characterization, whether or not it's good. But I do agree that we probably wait until Aquaman and see what happens there. I have seen a few of the movies that she has been in. She's honestly, I'll say, she's not amazing. She's not an amazing actress by any means. She's attractive, but I don't think by any means that the level of your attractiveness should land you roles in major roles in movies by any
It
means.
does, though. Unfortunately,
I know it does.
Well,
I know it does. But it's unfortunate, and that's what's unfortunate is I just don't. I don't look at it like that. I think like you have to be a good actress. Sure, if the role deems that you need to be attractive, sure, but you shouldn't be hired on just your attractive level. You should be hired if you can actually act well too. So,
agree.
So that's that. As far as Lois Lane goes, I definitely agree that they could have used her more. She could have been when they referred to her as the key in Batman vs Superman. She could have been used in a as the big guns as they did it, but they could have also used her as a way where. I agree. There's no way her as a character, especially based off of the version from the comics, that Superman would have died and she just would have become, the weeping widow or weeping fiance, for that matter, of Superman. It just wouldn't have been her. She would have, if anything, busied herself with tons of work because that's how that character is. She's not somebody who's going to just, mope. That's not Lois Lane. Lois Lane is somebody whose father is a army general. She's not going to just sit back and be like, oh, he's dead. Like, it's not going to happen.
I so agree with you, Dustin. Like, that is so the opposite. I mean, I know nothing about Mera, but I know a lot about Lois. And I've got to say, Lois is one of my favorite characters in comics. She would never do fluff pieces for like a year. That is so not Lois. She's the opposite of that. She'd be trying to go into the heart of the story and doing hard-hitting journalism, and also she'd be doing everything but just moping. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, if anything, like she could have been a much bigger tied to some of these other storylines, like the whole situation that happened at Star Labs with the people going missing. Instead of having some random news piece about the lady who needed to keep swearing about aliens probing her husband, they could have had her, Lois Lane, not interviewing, but doing an article about the missing people at Star Labs. Or eventually she could have been involved with the weird disturbance that was happening in Russia, or like they could have tied her to a bunch of these different things, and she could have been a much bigger key than just the person who was bringing Superman back down to reality from the evil version that awoke when he came back to life. They could have had her be the actual key to finding out where and what was actually going on, and that would have been much better for her character in the film. Outside of those characters, the only other thing there's nobody really else that was in the film that I was thinking was amazing. The only other thing I wanted to bring up was there was the sequence of the Amazons with the mother box. And the thing I wanted to talk about real quick is there was a thing that I saw online talking about the difference between what the Amazons wore in the movie Wonder Woman and what the Amazons wore in Justice League. And there was a comment, there was pictures of this floating around online for like 2 weeks prior to the film. And I honestly thought to myself, so basically the picture was them wearing their armor in the first film. It was basically, they had full breastplates, covered up everything. They did wear skirts, but it was definitely battle skirts. It wasn't like anything like that. Yeah, and it was very metal. There was a lot of metal in their armor. Suddenly, when we skip to Justice League, which actually takes place 100 years into the future, suddenly their armor becomes leather pieces and not like black tight leather, but just like typical brown leather from that era of time that you would associate them with. But there's suddenly all the metal's gone, and except for their headbands that they wear and a couple of small details on their outfits. But all of a sudden, their entire midsection, their midriffs are completely exposed. And there was a lot of people online who were complaining about, why would these Amazon warriors be battling with their midriffs exposed? That doesn't make any sense for a warrior. And I would completely agree with that. I just have to say there that I completely agree that there would be no reason you would ever in your wildest dreams have the characters wearing an outfit like that. It doesn't make any sense. And it does feel, as the people were pointing out, that they were trying to sex up the Amazons for the purpose of the film, which honestly is a disservice to what Wonder Woman did as a film for the female characters in this universe.
Dustin, can I jump in? Sorry, midway through what you were saying, which I really agreed with, my actual connection dropped in and out, but I'm back now. But I picked up the general gist of what you were saying in terms of the change in outfits. I agree that I feel like this is what they call, like, I'm no expert on feminist studies, but like the male gaze. Zack Snyder definitely is kind of framing that when he dresses them. When you look at the two versions, the Amazons from Wonder Woman, who, as you say, are battle armored, they're literally in armor, and then you compare it to when you actually see the sort of more bikini style version in Justice League, it is kind of inexcusable in a way because Patty Jenkins did such a good job with Wonder Woman. But this points to a major problem with this movie, which is that when Batman Superman came out, he was already shooting Justice League and he was already going his own direction. He had a lot of power at the time. And I think that what we got here is just that inevitable compromise between his vision as the overriding director at the time. It's disappointing, and I think people are right to pick it up. I'm a huge Wonder Woman fan and really enjoyed that movie. That said, guys, I'm sometimes a bit of a lazy viewer. I didn't really notice it in the film, but that's because I'm conditioned to not notice that kind of thing. Like there is, if we're asking ourselves, is it sexist? Yes, it's sexist. You know what I mean? I sometimes, if I break it down that far, it is a sexist thing. Unfortunately, we're so conditioned to accept it that I didn't even notice it. But I'm glad it was picked up and noticed, and I'm sure in Wonder Woman 2, Patty Jenkins will go her own direction. Sorry if I ran over some of your points because I did cut out whilst you were talking, but so that's all I've got to say on the matter.
Yeah, no, you definitely didn't walk over anything I said. It's just one of those things where I probably wouldn't, and I'll admit, I probably wouldn't have noticed it that much at all unless somebody else pointed it out to me after the fact, if it wasn't for seeing the picture that was floating around online beforehand. And I just kept thinking to myself, well, that's a big oversight. I mean, and I agree, yes, Wonder Woman or Justice League was already filming after Batman vs. Superman came out. They literally started production like 2 weeks after Batman vs. Superman came out. So this movie was already done. Like they already were in pre-production before all of that. The one disconnect I have is that Wonder Woman, the film, was filmed and finished before Batman vs. Superman came out. So there should have been at least the continuity in, as a producer of maybe Wonder Woman and Justice League, maybe you should have thought to yourself, maybe there should be some more continuity between the two costumes or the sets of costumes that these characters are wearing between the two films. Or if you're going to chalk it up to, well, there's 100 years difference in time frame, so maybe their costumes could change, fine, but you don't downgrade from battle armor to leather bikini type outfits. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, if they were going to do the bikini outfits, in the super ancient 5,000 year battle between them and Steppenwolf, that would make a little bit more sense because that's a little bit more of a primitive era where you could have maybe made sense with that, but not in the current time frame of everything that's happening. All right, so real quick,
can I just say one quick thing just to add to that? I agreed. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like they had wardrobe and costume design and all these things for the Amazons all ready and done for Wonder Woman, and it's a shame that they didn't just stick with that. That said, I didn't find anything with the Amazons nearly as gratuitous as the shot of Diana when she's in her civilian gear. There's a nice shot of her behind when she's getting out of the car.
I noticed that too.
Necessary as anything. Certainly
that was a real ass shot. That really was like, let's really check out Wonder Woman's ass.
That's the whole thing, and it's one of the things about Wonder Woman is at no point did they sexualize her for that whole movie, and then you have a different director in a different movie, and at the first opportunity, she's wearing leather pants and
they have her butt is like in 3/4 of the screen.
Yeah, I noticed that.
All right, so the last character I want to talk about before we get into some of our other things to talk about is Steppenwolf as a villain. I'm going to let you guys talk first because I know I could probably go on and you guys might have some of the same points that I have. But Steppenwolf as a villain, how did you guys feel?
Okay, well, for me, Steppenwolf was underwhelming, and he only got more so. I enjoyed the first sequence with the Amazons. I really enjoyed that whole sequence, and I didn't really mind Steppenwolf there. I thought he looked cool. I'm not really familiar with the New Gods other than what I've seen on the Justice League cartoon, and ironically enough, I watched one of the Justice League cartoons. I think the episode was called Twilight, and Steppenwolf appears for about 2 seconds at the start and gets blown up. And that's how threatening Steppenwolf is in that cartoon. But for some reason, which I never will understand, they said, let's just make Steppenwolf the whole villain, and he'll have a gaggle of cannon fodder parademons and no one else. And as the movie wore on, and I felt like it got more and more video gamey with the script. Like it felt like a cutscene a lot of the time from a video game when Steppenwolf was having his moment with the boxes and stuff. I just never felt he was really much. And then at the end, he's whimpering kind of thing when Superman's about to kick his ass along with the rest of the league. And I was like, man, this guy is such a disappointment as a villain. Like if I was Darkseid, his boss, I would just use those beams that come out of Darkseid's eyes and just annihilate him. He is useless. It's not, but one thing I will say is I thought it was voice acted very well. I thought the guy had a good sense of sort of theater. He was playing it okay, and I'm not familiar with Steppenwolf. I thought he was a monster. But like, to be honest, I don't think I've ever read him in a comic ever. He seemed more like a human though in the cartoon. I don't know, underwhelming as a villain. He needed more support. I think if it had been Steppenwolf and, for example, Desaad, who I know from some of the comics, which is Darkseid's torturer, or potentially the Darkseid himself, and Steppenwolf was just one of the gang sort of thing, like one of the henchmen, it would have been better. But it really felt like it was a henchman getting a main gig, and he just wasn't up to it. If you can't beat the league by yourself, then what is the point? And he really just didn't have the power set to beat Superman. As soon as Superman turned up, he was like, uh-oh, I'm done. Yeah, so that was a failure, I think, of the script as much as anything, and probably a concession to the runtime, which had to be under 2 hours, according to the CEO or whatever of Warner's had said it had to be. I think they went with a very basic villain. I was disappointed that there was no Darkseid, or there was one mention. I sort of hoped that at some point there would be a reveal of Darkseid and Steppenwolf was just like the lead-up act. But no, Steppenwolf was the guy, and for me, as a villain, extremely underwhelming. That's my views.
As I agree with everything you just said.
Thank you.
CGI in particular was absolute for Steppenwolf. I don't think that his lips synced up with the dialogue once in the whole movie. And as a villain, he was very big monster, comes to Earth, needs some sort of artifact to destroy the Earth for reasons. And the one thing that I'm kind of glad at looking back at it is that they referenced Darkseid quickly, but I am so thankful that they didn't try to shoehorn anybody else into this movie. Because with everything else going on, you've got to set up the team, you've got to bring back Superman, you've got to do all these different things. For the movie they wanted to tell, could they have done a better job setting up the villain? Absolutely. But if you were going to just make a cookie cutter monster villain, have them come to Earth, do their thing, and leave, I'm really glad that they went a bit more obscure and didn't waste a good villain, as opposed to like bring Darkseid to Earth and this is your cinematic shot at doing Darkseid. I wouldn't be surprised if they took what I think the big problem was I think Marvel has beat them to the punch with setting up Thanos, which is very, very, very similar for multiple reasons to Darkseid. So I think they wanted to stay away from that. So they figured they'd set up Steppenwolf, let him do his thing, and then they'd move on to something else. And as a villain or a monster or a threat for the team to deal with, it did the job as well as it could have, considering that they didn't want to spend any time setting up any kind of backstory or making the character a character. He's really just this thing that shows up. I mean, they really could have just had Doomsday show up, do the exact same stuff, and it would have been the same.
Well, I would agree about the CG. I definitely believe that the stuff that was everything that we saw was not very good. It honestly felt as if they got to a point where they had spent too much money and suddenly they had to take a cheaper route with the CG. And that was evident also with the crazy mustache removal stuff as well. It didn't look very good. There was plenty of other things that looked really good. A lot of the stuff, anything that had to do with the Flash moving in the super slow motion, that stuff looked amazing. But that stuff was probably planned from the very, very beginning because that is technically some of the stuff that Zack Snyder's always known for doing is a lot of that slow-mo stuff. That stuff had no problem, but it was when it came to the villain and it came to the CG that they used for the villain, it was very bad. Now, here's the plus and minus about running a site for as long as I have. I initially when Man of Steel came out, this is a brief history lesson for those of you who have not been fans of all of these films or have followed the news since basically 2013. But here's a quick synopsis of what happened since 2013. So Man of Steel came out a month and a half after Man of Steel came out. Comic-Con happened where Zack Snyder had Harry Lennox come out and hint at a Batman vs. Superman movie. Warner Brothers technically officially announced it at Comic-Con, and then it was a couple months later that they announced that Ben Affleck was going to be Batman in Batman vs. Superman. And initially, the film was planned for a release in 2015. Summer of 2015 was when Batman vs. Superman was supposed to release. In 2015, what happened was they at that point they had pushed Batman vs. Superman back to 2016. It was going to release in March. At that point, they announced the slate of DC films. It was supposed to be Batman vs. Superman in 2016 in March, and then there were going to be Suicide Squad in the summer. 2017 was going to be Wonder Woman and Justice League Part 1. 2018 was going to be Flash and then Aquaman. 2019 was going to see Justice League Part 2. Now, if you remember correctly, it was planned, as Snyder had said in multiple interviews when Batman vs. Superman came out, that Justice League Part 1 and Justice League Part 2 was initially supposed to be the second and third parts of the trilogy that he was starting with Batman vs. Superman. If you went into this movie with the expectation that this was a standalone film, then you probably had some issues with the plot. You most likely had a lot of issues with the villain. This movie was initially meant to be a setup to Darkseid being in Part 2. That was, I believe, always the original intent of Zack Snyder, was to get to the point where we see Darkseid in Part 2, which would have been in 2019, which just so happened to be happening right around the same time that Marvel initially had Avengers 3 Part 1 coming out, which was also supposed to involve Thanos. Now Avengers 3 is coming out next year, and that, which was originally Part 1 and Part 2, is now two separate Avengers films altogether. But the idea was, I believe that at the time, DC and Zack Snyder were racing to get to 2019 to have Darkseid as the big bad, to show that Darkseid was a much bigger and better villain than Thanos, as Thanos was appearing over in Avengers. I think that was the entire intent. And that falls in line with getting Steppenwolf here. As you both said, Steppenwolf is, to a degree, a lackey, not even the lackey. He's just a lackey as a group of all of the other people that work underneath Darkseid. I'm talking Caliban, Desaad, Granny Goodness, the entire group of Furies. I mean, there's a lot of characters that Steppenwolf is just in the same bracket as. He's not any better. He's not like the lieutenant, in my opinion, of Darkseid. He's just one of the characters that's part of the group of New Gods that's underneath Darkseid. Knowing that Steppenwolf was it and their intent was to go Darkseid, I was actually upset knowing that, because the thing is, Darkseid is like the epitome of the Justice League villain. He is the ultimate Justice League villain. You can't go the route of having Darkseid be the villain for Justice League and then goes from there. You get to the top. Everything after that is not. In some degree, it's almost as if it's almost like comparing the Dark Knight with the Joker, and the Joker being Batman's ultimate villain, as most people consider. Then immediately the follow up film has Bane. Some people like Bane, some people don't like Bane, but the reality of it is Bane is probably not nearly as well known or acknowledged as a A-list villain compared to the Joker, or in the same bracket as the Joker. You can't. It's hard to follow up somebody, especially like Heath Ledger, who did an amazing job in the role of the Joker, with villain that's not as well known with, the way it was. It's very difficult. So if you go the route of having Darkseid appear as the main villain in Justice League Part 2, where do you go from there? You just stop making movies? You have to plan more long-term. Marvel has done it in a unique way where they've been hinting at Thanos for years, but by the time he actually shows up, it's going to be over 10 years from the initial beginning of the universe, not just 3 or 4 years after, they first make the first film of this group. So the problem is that's their initial intent. The initial intent was get to Darkseid. You can tell that at some point they decided maybe we shouldn't be going towards Darkseid, but Steppenwolf was still the main villain. They had already been too much into production when they decided this. I remember distinctly last year, at some point when I believe it was after Comic-Con when they released the initial trailer at Comic-Con last year, I distinctly remember marketing and some interviews talking about how, no, we're not doing Justice League Part 1 and Justice League Part 2. It's just Justice League. It's just one Justice League film. We may make a sequel for Justice League, but that is the film we're doing right now, is just Justice League. And that made perfect sense because I didn't want them to go the route of, let's do Part 1 and Part 2. If you look at this film, the way it was produced as Part 1 of 2, it actually makes a heck of a lot more sense that Steppenwolf is the villain. But it's not Part 1 anymore, but Steppenwolf still was the villain. And honestly, Steppenwolf as a villain is not really that great. I found it a little bit. The other problem is, if you look at Steppenwolf as the villain as it's portrayed here, the Justice League without Superman are unable to take down Steppenwolf. But as soon as Superman shows up, then the tide turns and suddenly the Justice League has the upper hand. When you eventually then just end up getting to Darkseid, unless you add a number of members to the Justice League in that short time, how is it explained that Darkseid is actually that much more powerful than Steppenwolf if he's taken down by the Justice League collectively and Superman's part of it too? The only way it would have worked is if you didn't have Superman involved and it was just the combination of the team was able to take down Steppenwolf. Superman comes back in Part 2, and maybe that was the initial intent by Snyder. That was maybe what he had planned, and then Darkseid was supposed to be overthrown by the return of Superman. I don't know exactly how it goes because we don't have the actual script that Zack Snyder was filming and then the adjustments that were made later on in the story. That all being said, I don't think that Steppenwolf was meant to be what he was in this film. I mean, as a standalone villain, it's a very weak villain. I don't think it needed to have the entire league come together as well as Superman coming back from the dead in order to take down Steppenwolf. He just didn't even come across as that big of a threat, other than just a physical threat as they portrayed it, but not as he's, super strategic. He's planning this massive attack, nothing like that. It was just like, he's a physical threat. So we need a physical character who I guess is more powerful than, well, no, they showed it as more powerful than Wonder Woman and Aquaman. We need somebody more powerful than that. So we need Superman to come back in order to turn the tides. If they went the route of Darkseid later on, or if they chose to keep it with a Part 1 and Part 2 and they did it the way they did it here, I don't know how Darkseid would have actually been able to be believed as a bigger threat than Steppenwolf was if it was just the same exact team. You could do this much further down the line and add a heck of a lot more members. And as this movie pointed out a couple different times, that is entirely possible because, when Bruce says the thing about a big table and Wonder Woman says with spaces for, he's like with six seats, and she says with space for more, it made perfect sense that the league could get bigger, that you could add more members, that the addition of more members of the Justice League, and then you have the bigger threat of Darkseid later on. That makes perfect sense, and I could see that happening. But the way I think Snyder initially envisioned what he wanted to do, I think it became something completely different because they realized, wait, maybe we shouldn't race towards the biggest bad that the Justice League has ever seen.
Dustin, I've got a quick point, mate. Did you think, though, I just thought to myself, would you have liked to have seen a scene at the end, for example, after Steppenwolf, gets sucked away or whatever happened to him, of Darkseid on Apocalypse, like glowering with his eyes, burning or something like that? Because, Darkseid, I'm no expert on Darkseid, but he has those Omega beams that come out of his head. He's a pretty big threat. I think he can kind of kill almost everything with those beams.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, definitely. There's no question about that.
So would you have, because I sort of would have liked that. I like very similar to the Avengers with Thanos. I would have thought maybe a scene with Darkseid on Apocalypse with maybe, Granny Goddess or whoever her name is, like next to him. Just something to give people out there who don't know anything about the comics just, oh, wow, there's a way bigger villain in the background. But we didn't get that at all.
Yeah, and I feel like if it was Part 1, Part 2, we probably would have gotten something like that, or at least maybe the end credit scene would have potentially been something like that. But I think that the best way to do it would have been, he gets pulled up through the boom tube, and like the other thing was they never really explained the boom tubes that well. It always came across as it had something to do with the mother boxes, but boom tubes yes, they're related to the mother boxes, but not in the same technology way that they were explained in this film. The boom tubes has always been a way for the people from Apocalypse to travel back and forth, and there's other people who have had boom tubes as well that have traveled back and forth between the universes and things like that. That's kind of a side note, but anyway, I think the best way to have done it would have been Steppenwolf gets pulled back through the boom tube, and he gets to wherever he is. You see this fiery, brimstone world that was hinted at in the past. And you basically see Darkseid sitting on his throne, and you see maybe the backs of all of the other members of his group, like Calabac and Granny Goodness and the Furies and Desaad, and you see all these other characters, but you just see them from the backside. As a fan, you might know who they are, but you see it's a larger group of characters, and you just hear Darkseid utter the words, "You failed me," or something like that. That makes sense, where it's like maybe he sent him as a scout to potentially take over this, thinking that it wasn't going to be that difficult. But then he failed, and you know that he failed, and you know that he's got many more people he could send to Earth instead of just Steppenwolf. So I think something like that, yes, would have worked. But I think the importance of not doing that at this point, it would have felt, I think if you would have done it in the film right now, it would have felt as too much of a reactionary measure towards what Marvel's doing with Thanos. And I mean, I know that, and I truly believe the initial intent of having Darkseid and the inclusion of Steppenwolf was reactionary to begin with to what Marvel was doing. But I feel as if you would have done a scene with Darkseid at all, whether it be him just saying something, whether it's just the back of his head, anything like that, it would have just felt reactionary towards what Marvel's doing. So I'm glad that they didn't do it in that way. Obviously, there's a bigger threat. They did name drop Darkseid at the very least. So obviously, they're putting it out there that there is something worse than Steppenwolf. But I think that if they did anything more than just the name drop that they did, I honestly feel that if it would just been reactionary.
I think that's entirely
fair
it.
point.
I think that's entirely it. I think Marvel kind of beat them to the punch with the Avengers. So if they did that at the end, they would have been accused of just copying what they did. And I think they're under enough scrutiny already that I think they didn't want to go there. It would have been awesome to see Darkseid show up at the end, and I kind of expected there to be something at the end, even if it was just Steppenwolf making a few comments about him failing Darkseid or whatever as he's pulled back into the boom tube at the end. But it's probably best that it didn't go there and just all of that for him.
All right, so now let's talk about overall, outside of the characters. Let's briefly talk about anything that you liked about the film, like any pros that you had on the film that you believe deserve a mention.
Okay. Well, looking at it overall, I think I mentioned already, I liked the end scene with how it was set up, in that we wound ourselves back up in Wayne Manor, and how that was going to be the new Hall of Justice, I guess. So I kind of enjoyed where everyone wound up, although it was a very fast paced 2 hours. And I have had some issues with the whole thing. I liked where the characters wound up, and I actually really felt that, given that Zack Snyder has clearly moved away from this franchise now, that they're in a decent position to keep going. So it was one of the situations where, whatever issues I may have had with some elements of the film, which I know I've discussed already, I really felt like the pacing was actually quite good, and it got us to a good end point. I think they've got a good chemistry between Batman and Wonder Woman. They teased. I liked that very brief tease of Green Lantern, which was just really to say, like, Green Lanterns exist in this universe. Here was one fighting thousands of years ago. Fill in the blanks, audience. I.e., we all know, like any Justice League fans out there, and I'm certainly one, we know that it's like the big seven. Well, they very much said, like, there's six, but there's room for more, which makes me think that there'll be another edition of Green Lantern at some point to fill out the seven and then potentially make them a bigger roster. So, just overall, I want to underline again, I felt there was good character work between all the actors. They had a good chemistry. And I just feel like when we're moving to the future, they're actually not in bad shape. I know that financially the movie's not doing quite the numbers they want, and it's quite divisive critically, but I still feel they're actually in pretty decent shape moving forward. So that would be kind of my big pluses from this movie overall.
I personally thought that I agree. The pacing I thought was well paced. I thought it didn't linger too long on any one thing. I thought that the big trinity, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, were well served in the story. The opening scene of Batman on the rooftop was great. I loved it. And once again, it was so nice to see Superman return to what we know Superman to be, because we just haven't seen it yet in this series. And like I've said before, I think it did a great job of sort of establishing what the tone of the DC universe should be in these movies going forward, where they're not focusing on how crappy to be a superhero like it did in some of the earlier movies, where it's just, hey, we're out there, we're going to save people, and it's going to be fun, and it's going to be an adventure. And I hope that this isn't the end of putting these characters together. I mean, I think that the big fear with the box office being what it seems to be for this movie is that they'd focus on the solo movies and just not team them up at all ever again. And I hope that's not the case, because I think they've seeded a lot of things very, very well, and I hope it can.
The thing I liked the most about this film was the overall lighter tone. And I'm not one to sit here and say that you can't have a darker version of characters in general, but a lot of the characters that are part of the Justice League outside of Batman should be much lighter. There was a lot of humor. There was some humor that I think was fine and completely worked for the film, and I think there was other humor that clearly was added and not necessarily necessary and fell flat because they were trying to do a little bit more of a job of lighting the tone. But I think in general, I enjoyed the fact that like you both said, the characters actually enjoyed doing what they were doing. It wasn't like a complaint. There wasn't any when you have Batman versus Superman, you have Wonder Woman who's basically saying, I don't want to be involved in this battle at all. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And the only reason she comes back is because of Doomsday, because she sees it on TV, and that's the only reason she comes back. Other than that, she doesn't have anything to do with being Wonder Woman. She's not that character anymore. You have Superman who, to a degree, he's insistent on the fact that Batman is this horrible person because he's a vigilante, but he never uses his actual reporting skills to actually figure out whether or not he actually is bad or good, or if, to a degree, yes, he did his investigation, didn't actually lead anywhere other than where Luthor wanted him to be led. But Batman comes across as a character who's like, I don't really want to do this. I'm just forced to do this because Superman could be something horribly evil. This doesn't feel like that at all. I mean, like, none of the characters feel like they're being forced. Yes, Aquaman to a degree is reluctant, but for the most part, they all are there to, they're all there because they believe in saving the world. It's not like Batman versus Superman, where Batman and Superman are there because they were manipulated into facing each other only so that Lex Luthor, I guess, could create Doomsday. I mean, like, just saying that out loud is kind of frustrating thinking about it. But it just comes down to, like, these characters, they're more enjoyable to watch become. And I think a lot of it has to do with the addition of Flash, because he's a much lighter tone character, and he's kind of like, in some ways, he's like the fanboy amongst us of us all. Like, he's geeking out when it's Batman. He sees the bat signal. He's like, oh, that's your signal. That means you got to go, right? Like, he's the fanboy amongst the group. And he had some great lines in the movie. He asked the question about, whether, what's Batman's superpower? And Batman's like, I'm rich. And I'm like, I mean, that's part of it. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the simplification of it. So, I mean, like, I think overall the tone was much better. I think the thing is, it was described by some critics as this was much more mainstream than the previous DC films outside of Wonder Woman. It was much more mainstream, where there's moviegoers in general would enjoy it a lot more. And I honestly agree with that. I think that people in general don't want to go to these movies just to basically be tortured by the emotional elements of these characters. They go to these movies to escape, and you don't want to escape to the dark, grim worlds of these characters. Batman can be a dark and grim character without it being some sort of horrible story. You have to have some sort of resolution where, there is good in the world. If you leave a movie and all you think about is the bad in the world, like, honestly, you leave Batman versus Superman and Superman's dead. What a horrible way to leave the movie. He's just dead. Like, great. You just spent 2.5 hours of your life and you're leaving thinking about how one of your characters that you might have walked into the movie really liking is now dead. Like, you have to leave the movie happy. You don't want to go to a movie and leave a movie that's sad. And honestly, the majority of movies that have sad endings, they get ripped apart by fans and critics alike. It's just how it is. And even if it is something that actually is reflecting on what happened in the comics, like Superman's death, the last thing you want is to hear all about death and destruction at the end of the film. I mean, like, Superman or Man of Steel to a degree is just like that. I mean, he kills Zod because Zod is destroying everything. The entire world's being destroyed. But where's the hope at the end of the film? There is hardly any. This movie actually feels like there's hope throughout the film. It's not just, at the end where it should be, but it also feels like Batman's trying to get somewhere to instill hope back into the world. He's trying to save the world. It's not just, I'm trying to stop something. I'm not, like, there actually is more of a reason. They talk about saving citizens in the film itself. So, I mean, like, I enjoyed that aspect of the film, I think, more than anything else. So talking about anything that you disliked, I'm sure there are a multitude of things that we've already talked about a bunch. But if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you truly disliked about the film, what is it?
Well, look, I think I've already mentioned it lacked a compelling narrative in a lot of ways. And I really think this is a criticism that could be leveled. I was actually thinking this during the movie. That criticism that it's like a cheesy video game can apply to so many of these big budget superhero movies. Like Avengers has a pretty cheesy, simplistic storyline. It just happens to work better than in this movie. I would say the fight scenes were cool at times, but some of the same elements that felt flat in the trailer, such as Aquaman surfing down the roof, were no better when inserted into the flow of this movie. So that the moment that we found that they were going to go to some part of Russia where, no one lives, I was like, I know exactly where we're headed, and I know exactly we're going to see the trailer scenes. And when they were inserted into the movie, I was hoping that they would have been better than they appeared in the trailer, but I didn't feel they were. Overall, I actually feared this movie would be worse than what it was, but it never ascended to great heights. And I think DC and Warner's are still playing catch up from a flawed start to their universe building. This is eventually another step out of that whole quagmire, and it is a fun experience. So don't get me wrong. It does, like, this conversation with you guys has really made me think, yeah, you know what? I gave it 7 out of 10, and I'm sticking to that score. It is a 7 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's not terrible either. Just don't expect a gripping story, kids. That would be my main thing here. And I do want to say, in terms of just something I forgot to mention, something I actually liked, the scene with Wonder Woman and Batman where she adjusts his shoulder, that was one of my most favorite scenes in this movie and in the DC universe overall. I think that was a really great little moment between two such iconic characters. And I did feel like when I was in the cinema, I was like, man, we're so lucky to have moments like this being played out on the big screen now instead of just in, cartoons or video games or the comics themselves. Like, the mainstream audience is getting to see these really cool characters interact. So there is that. But yeah, I mean, I had my criticisms, which I've outlined. Thanks.
That was very well put, especially the Bruce and Diana moment. I thought was great. I thought the story it did its job. It was fine. I was happy to see there were no moments like in Batman versus Superman. As much as I love that movie, there is zero reason why they're to be fighting. But the movie's called Batman versus Superman, so they have to fight and they have to find a reason. I didn't find that in this. I mean, everything seemed to happen fairly organically. They set up why they would want to bring Superman back and with Batman's guilt and all of that. So I thought it worked pretty well. Really, my only big negative with the movie is that the villains and that the CGI makes that villain even worse than he would have been otherwise.
I will say that my main issue with this is it goes back to the plot. I felt as if this was Act 1 and 2, but we didn't get the Act 3, or it's Act 1 and 3 if you want to look at it a different way, and there's no Act 2. I feel like this is just the beginning of something else because initially it was supposed to be Justice League Part 1 and Justice League Part 2. And I think the villain is also my biggest issue with it. Steppenwolf, when you have as big of a group and as iconic of a group as the Justice League, when you have a villain that I'd probably would say 95% of mainstream, maybe even higher, 95% of mainstream audience has no clue who the villain is, that's a big red flag. I mean, that's a huge problem when you have an iconic group coming together. And you could argue that to a degree, when Avengers happened, you didn't you might not have known who the villain was, and it didn't make a difference. And Avengers 2 came around, and mainstream audience still didn't know who the main villain, who the villain was before the film. And sure, I guess you could argue that. I didn't know who the villains were in either one of those films, but I don't read Marvel. So, I mean, I guess you could argue that, but at the same time, Marvel's limited on who they can use too, because they only have access to so many characters, because Fox owns the rights to certain characters, Sony owns the rights to other characters. So they're at a disadvantage to begin with because of the characters they have. But at the same time, you have the DC universe, which is all under the same umbrella. You can use whoever you want, and you choose to use this. I mean, I was having, when I was talking to my wife about the film after we saw it, and I was sitting there saying, I can't honestly sit there and say that I'm a huge Justice League fan where I could name off a gazillion different villains that they could face. But I could certainly say that anybody out there who is mainstream audience probably knows at least something about the Legion of Doom, and knows that there's a group of villains that comes together with basically one villain from each one of the members of the Justice League as a evil group of villains. I mean, most people probably know about that. You have, as far as what outside of the Legion of Doom and the other versions of it, like the Injustice League, Secret Society of Supervillains, things like that. There's also the crime syndicate, you've got the.
They would be cool, Dustin. The crime
exactly.
syndicate would be fantastic, man.
And that's one of the things I would love to see. And they could do that completely as a one-off group of villains, because you don't ever have to see them again. They come to Earth Prime, or whatever you're going to call this, Earth Zero, and then that's it. They're defeated and they disappear. That would be amazing to see. So I mean, I think that would be a good group. But then obviously, yes, you could go the route of Darkseid. You just don't have to have that as the end all be all of the characters. There's I can't sit here and say there's a ton of threats out there, but even as individual threats or individual team-ups of villains that aren't necessarily the Legion of Doom or something like that. You have Lex Luthor teaming with one other person or something like that, and makes it a bigger threat. You don't necessarily have to have all of the members of the Justice League play a prominent role in it, as they actually showed here with some of the characters. Didn't need to be as big of a part as they needed to be. But it's just one of those things where it's I know that there's probably not a ton of things out there that they could do with the Justice League. But then again, you don't need to do a million Justice League films. You could do just a couple Justice League films, and then eventually, if you get to the point where you've decided you've worn out all other options, you could go the route of Darkseid. But I would never put Darkseid in the beginning of the situation. I would put that as the final chapter of it, and then from there, you don't do any Justice League films. You just do solo films or something like that, because they've defeated the ultimate villain. They don't need to have, they don't need to be as big of a group. They don't need to be working as a team collectively in a movie together if they've already met their ultimate match. So that's my major problem with it. I could tell going into it that the intent of using this villain was to get to Darkseid, and now they still might do that sometime in down the line, but for now that's not in the plans, and I just feel like that kind of hindered the story because of that. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is some of the Easter eggs, as well as the post-credit scenes. So before we get into the post-credit scenes, because we're going to talk about those together, the one we talked about Crispus Allen, was there anything else that you saw in any part of the film that you thought, hey, that's a really cool Easter egg?
Wow, you've really put me on the spot. I'm the worst at I didn't see Crispus Allen coming. I'm one of those guys in films who is constantly surprised by just about every little twist there is. Dusty, can you please give me something, man, with an Easter egg? Because I really didn't see much that made me think, that's something that is it doesn't. Fan service.
Let's put it this way: it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific Easter egg where it's this was okay. I know, for example, this would probably be the epitome of an Easter egg because it's so out there. But there was a point where Batman is, he's going after that thief in the beginning of the film, and there's an actual billboard in the background that says Janus Cosmetics, which is a hint to Black Mask, because Roman Sionis, his parents, his family's empire is built off of that company. So there's that. But that's not to say that that is what you need to come up with. I mean, like anything out there that you saw that you thought that's really cool. I mean, like one of the things that is not a huge Easter egg, but is just a cool moment that expands the universe is like the addition of the Green Lantern in the battle between them. That's a really cool moment. It's not really something you have to like study the screen for, but you can definitely appreciate something like that because they're acknowledging that that Green Lanterns exist out there, which was kind of cool.
I've got a question because I know in the trailer he was like no lanterns. He never actually says that in the cinema, does he? In the
never says movie, it. He actually never says the thing about Kryptonians either. He does say something about Superman's dead and that's why he's there, but there's a lot of stuff that clearly was cut out. There was a couple of different scenes in the trailers that were definitely cut out as well. But he clearly says the thing about Green Lanterns because of that flashback that happened, 5,000 years ago, where there was a Green Lantern involved.
Because I imagine a Green Lantern would have been pretty handy for the Justice League in this movie. Like a Green Lantern, I could imagine, would have had a pretty good chance against Steppenwolf because, from memory, Wonder Woman, it was kind of like fighting him to like a narrow loss. You know what I mean? Like she wasn't going to beat him by herself, but she wasn't terrible. Much like when she fought Superman. I don't know if it's an Easter egg, but I really enjoyed, I sort of wish I enjoyed it more, but the fight between Wonder Woman and Superman was very brief, but I sort of like that moment. I guess I want to talk about the post-credit scenes because to me they really stuck out. I'm pretty bad at this kind of stuff. It reminds me of like in the Arkham games where you walk down a street and it's like Dixon Street or something like that kind of stuff, but good spotting by you on the Janus Cosmetics. But I'm going to turn it over to Paul because I am terrible at Easter eggs. I'm sorry, guys.
No problem.
I appreciated that the attention to detail, especially like in the rooftop scene where Batman. Yeah, you see the Janus Cosmetics billboard. I missed that, but I did see the Ace Chemicals in the background.
Yeah.
So it was nice to see that again. I think I saw the Iceberg Lounge. Did either of you see that?
If it was there, I missed it. When they were in Gotham, I was trying to scan the screen as much as possible to see anything I could. So, I mean, it's entirely possible it was there. It's one of those things where when I go back for my second viewing, I'm definitely going to be keeping a bigger eye out for that kind of stuff. That's all because the first time I just try to absorb as much as I can for what the film is. But the second time I'm always searching for everything I possibly can.
Good point.
Yeah, that's what I'll be doing on time too.
I guess there's a mention of the Penguin. That's an Easter egg, is it? Like it sort of talks back to previous times when he fought.
They say the thing about wind-up penguins, and that's a reference definitely to Batman Returns to a degree. But yeah, I mean, like, I won't say that there's a ton of Easter eggs. It's one of those things where I think there probably has been more Easter eggs in some of the other films, and maybe there'll be a bigger list that comes out about Easter eggs after the movie, after the movie's been out for a little bit longer. But I have not. I didn't see a ton of stuff. I did see an article published about Easter eggs, but the list was kind of like, it was like 7 things that was in Justice League. And out of the 7, I think like 5 of them were just kind of ho-hum, like, well, okay, anybody could have saw that. It's not really an Easter egg, including the Green Lantern thing. But so let's talk about the post-credit scenes, though. So real briefly, because I don't have a lot to say about this one, let's talk about the Flash Superman. So we have Flash and Superman getting to go, basically racing to decide who's fastest. I thought that was a really cool, unique scene. Here in the States, Justice League Action, which is a cartoon that's currently airing on Cartoon Network, they actually aired an episode just this past Saturday, or just the day after the film officially came out, which actually had Flash and Superman racing, and I'd love to sit there and say that it was by design, and it entirely could have been, but it was just maybe a coincidence that episode actually released. It was a brand new episode; it hadn't aired before, so it definitely could have released at that time. But I thought it was kind of cool watching the cartoon, thinking, "Hey, that just happened in the movie." But I don't have a lot to say. I mean, I know it's a throwback to the comics. It's happened in a variety of different cartoons and animated shows and things like that. But I mean, other than a cool little moment, I don't have a lot to say. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
I mean, I really enjoyed it because I mean, how many times leading into this film did we hear people from the cast and Snyder say it's a sense of joy, yada, yada, yada. They kept repeating it like a mantra. But you know what? This scene is exactly that, because what's more fun than Superman and Flash running, because it's that age-old argument. If Superman can beat Flash, why is Flash, what's so cool about Flash? And it's a circular argument, and there never really should be a winner. It's always should be some sort of a draw. And it made me smile because when I got into comics like heavily in the late 90s, I bought at some point along the way a Superman versus Flash trade paperback, and it's a collection of all their races across, the time span of the comics. So it starts off the real classic races and goes to 70s, 80s and stuff. And I always had a soft spot for that little debate. So that also sounds like great brand synergy, Dustin. They had a race on the cartoon, which I haven't actually watched Justice League Action. I would like to sit down and watch and see if it's any good, because I've heard mixed reports. But it's just a cool little scene, and I'm sure you know what I saw with my girlfriend and actually her mother as well, and they really liked that scene. They thought it was really funny, so it worked in that sense.
I liked the scene. Don't get me wrong. Like it's a neat throwback to something they've done over and over and over again in the comics and cartoons and everywhere else. I just kind of felt that it was a bit out of nowhere. Like they didn't set up enough of a rivalry or relationship between Superman and the Flash to really pay that off in any way. Like it's a neat moment. It really is. It's just like the Avengers eating shawarma at the end of the first movie. It's a fun little moment. I just felt that there were other moments that they could have paid off. Like they could have had Cyborg and the Flash going to brunch or something like that. Some little moment that they set up earlier in the movie where it's and pay that off in a little scene rather than something that happens in the last 10 minutes of the movie and then pay that off.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I don't have a whole lot to add to what you guys said. I mean, it did feel very much like the Avengers shawarma, and maybe it was something that was added after the fact by Joss Whedon. I do remember when Batman vs. Superman came out, and the question was, is there a mid-credit scene or is there an end-credit scene? I remember Zack Snyder distinctly going out there and saying, no, there is not. We're not Marvel. We're not doing that. This isn't Marvel. And I thought it was slightly odd that this movie.
Mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This movie, on the other hand, it's entirely possible that these scenes that ended up happening with the Flash could have been added after the fact, after Zack Snyder left, and then the final scene, which we'll just get into right here, that scene could have been added, or not added, but it could have happened at some other point and then just became the end credit scene. And that scene is actually probably one of my favorite scenes of the entire film. So the scene starts off with Lex Luthor, who's supposedly locked in jail, and he's being told to leave his cell. He's not leaving. The prison guard goes up to him, finds out it's not Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor has escaped, and somebody else has been sitting inside of his cell for a while. Then we cut to a speedboat that is heading towards a massive yacht that is clearly well beyond the means of most people. The person on the speedboat is actually Slade Wilson Deathstroke. And he gets up onto the boat or the yacht, and Lex Luthor is sitting there. Lex Luthor says, so I'm sure you heard our friends are creating a league. Maybe it's time for us to create a league of our own. Now, when I saw that, I had goosebumps. I was like, oh, this is going to be so great. Because when I think of the Justice League facing off against a group of villains, whether it be the Legion of Doom, or in this case, most likely what they're hinting at is the Injustice League, because both Lex Luthor and Deathstroke were part of the Injustice League. That is something I would rather see that way more than seeing Steppenwolf or even Darkseid to a degree, because I mean, like, Darkseid could be is a huge threat to the Justice League, but you can't have those character moments like you can with these other villains. And you can't have, when you have a league of villains, whether it's the Legion of Doom, like I said, this is Secret Society of Supervillains, all of those groups, you can have the ability to like see these character interactions between characters you would never even imagine them coming together. Like you could have Joker as part of the Injustice League, as he was in the comics as well, where you have him interacting with Lex Luthor. That is a cool thing to see. That is something that outside of the comics, we've never really been able to see. Sure, it's been explored here and there in cartoons, but to see that in live action, that would be amazing. I mean, like, there's no question about it. So, I mean, like, I left thinking to myself, well, if that is the hint as to what we are potentially going to get in Justice League 2, whenever that eventually happens, I am all in for Justice League Part 2, or I mean, Justice League 2, or whatever they want to call it. That is something I can't wait for. So, I mean, I thought it was awesome. What did you guys think?
Oh, I mean, I give this second post-credit scene, I give it pretty much a 10 out of 10, and I want to kind of unpick it because when it started, and clearly, Luther, they were walking up to Luther. This is the way my brain was working, and I'm so glad they didn't go down this route. When they tapped him on the shoulder and he turned around and it was the old bald guy, my mind immediately went to, like, that's a classic Luther from, like, the comics, like the 70s and 60s and stuff. He was an older, balder guy, and I thought, wow, has Luther actually been recast through some sort of, in my head, I was thinking something to do with Darkseid. And I was like, what? Are they actually recast Luther to be a fat bald guy? And I was kind of confused. And then it cut to what was a much better scene. And, like it made more sense story-wise. And I love that reveal. Suddenly I saw Luther was there and I'm like, oh, sweet, cool. Okay, so Jesse Eisenberg's Luther. He was toning his act down, thankfully, from the first movie. And then when Deathstroke came on and took his helmet off, and I'm not the world's biggest Deathstroke fan, but I was like, man, this is great. I really thought the look of Deathstroke was fantastic. And this comes from someone, I know a little bit about Deathstroke from here and there, what I've read, but I thought it was fantastic. And Dustin, I don't kind of 100% know the difference between the Injustice gang and the Legion of Doom. But I'm down for this.
Honestly, it's just the roster of characters. I mean, the Legion of Doom was always picture like the Super Friends, where you have the lineup of the Justice League, but then every member of the Justice League has a villain. So like Superman has Lex Luthor, Aquaman has Black Manta. You have the Legion of Doom. I think back then, Cheetah for Wonder Woman. So I mean, like everybody has their villain, and then Injustice League was just honestly, Injustice League, in my opinion, is a group of villains that's more based around intellect and not about the superpowers. The main roster included a variety of characters, but the vast majority of them were all non-superpowered beings. Like there's a lot of Batman villains in the Injustice League. There was Black Manta. There was Lex Luthor. Deathstroke was on the team. So like you could involve the Teen Titans if you wanted to with Deathstroke. But I mean, that's the big difference between all these teams is just who's on the team. That's really the only difference.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just want to say that I think you've made a really good point, because the more I think about it, if Justice League 2, when it eventually does come, let's imagine that it comes out, let's just say within the next 3 years of Justice League 2, a lot may have happened in that time. You will have had Wonder Woman 2. You will definitely have had Flashpoint. You definitely will have had Aquaman as a bare minimum. So they could be in a very much more positive position than they are now, critically and fan-wise. And people by that moment could be like, Justice League 2, we're ready to roll. And if they go with not a kind of God presence of Darkseid, but instead a Justice League Injustice kind of thing, where, as you say, it's more of a human conflict, I think that could really, really work. And let's face it, Snyder won't be directing it. I think it will have a better flavor. I think that's a really good direction for them to go in. And I felt both the post-credit sequences were actually very good. And when he took his helmet off as Deathstroke, in the cinema, I was like, oh, yeah, that's cool. It looked like the comic book character. And I don't always need a character to look the same. But in this moment, when he took that helmet off, I just thought that was one of the best. I thought the people who did the makeup and everything had done such a fantastic job with that. I got a real charge out of that scene.
I agree. I thought that was one of the best parts. I think that, as you've said, Dustin, the lineup of DC villains is, I think, one of the big strengths of in general. I think they have the absolute best lineup of villains used in anything. I don't think Marvel can compare in the slightest. And I think that if they wanted to go the route of the Injustice Gang or Legion of Doom or whatever they wanted to do for a sequel, I think that would really set them apart from anything else that was doing. So I was really, really, really happy to see them hint towards that they have that in mind. I think I'd heard that they'd cut both Jesse Eisenberg and Joe Manganiello from the movie, and fair enough. Everything else was cut, so I really didn't expect to see them in it. And I guess I assumed that the second post-credit sequence was going to be. I thought it was going to be something involving where we'd see the ring fly into somebody's finger or something like that. I didn't know what to expect. So when we got the reveal of Luthor, I thought, okay, cool, Luthor's escaped. That's good enough. That's not bad. But then when we got the reveal of, we got the shot of from behind of the boat going up to the yacht, and you can see Deathstroke's mask. That was one of the happiest moments of the movie for me. I thought it was fantastic. I thought that Eisenberg was more Luthor in those 2 minutes than he was in the entire movie he
Yeah,
had to put.
agreed.
So agreed.
Like he was Lex Luthor. He looked like Lex Luthor. He was doing Lex Luthor things. He was saying Lex Luthor things. He was putting in plan into motion. He was fantastic. And Deathstroke, note perfect. That's exactly what Deathstroke should look like. And I really, really hope that they do something with this now.
Yeah, and I think the important thing about this is that it would if they did something with the Injustice League or some group of villains that aren't superpower based per se against the Justice League. I think if anything, that would be much more interesting because it would make themselves different than what we're seeing with Marvel. Like you look at Marvel and everything that they've done with the Avengers, going up against a group of villains or like Ultron in Avengers 2, or eventually we'll see Thanos in Avengers 3, or whatever the heck it was in Avengers 1, Loki or whatever. Like every single one of those was a humongous threat. I mean, like Ultron is basically a mechanical god to a degree. You have Thanos, which is a god. You have Loki, which, his aspect of that is part of, is very god worthy. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, to me, going a completely different route, this is exactly what you could do. You could, Black Manta will be established within the Aquaman film. We know he's going to appear. It might not be in a huge role. It could just introduce him for future uses, but it is definitely something that they could, he could be part of this. You've got characters from Suicide Squad that could be brought in. You could connect a lot of films by doing, just a group of villains. And I think it would be a really cool take to see the Justice League just being outsmarted to a degree. I mean, like, sure, Batman has been planning and is super smart and doing all this stuff, but like figuring out ways to outsmart Superman and Wonder Woman, who aren't made to be these like great intellectual people, that would be is different. It's something that they're not doing anywhere else right now. And what's important is you have to figure out ways to make yourself different, so you're not being constantly compared to what the other company is doing.
Yeah.
So,
Dustin, have you read the Grant Morrison JLA? Because that's my primary. Yeah,
yes.
It's excellent. Something like Rock of Ages. I'm not saying they need to do it exactly the same, but that is a great example of what you're talking about. What Grant Morrison did there with the Injustice Gang or whatever they were called. The way that they play with the Justice League in that thing, it has Joker and stuff getting, I think they're sort of within his brain and everything like that. It is a fantastic example of how to use Legion of Doom / Injustice Gang against the Justice League. And it had Luthor, the puppeteer sort of thing behind it all. I think going in that direction for DC for a movie might be something that would blow audiences away.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of Justice League stories out there. Like Tower of Babel, to a degree, is also a really good storyline where it works perfectly. Where you could introduce a group of villains, and they slowly start taking them out, and then it comes to be revealed that it's because Batman has been, coming up with ways to take out the members of his own team for years. Like that would be something cool, and that could be definitely something they could do with like Justice League 3 or something like that, where it's not having to focus so much on, like, you could use a variety of different villains in either one of those films, and it doesn't make a difference who. You don't have to touch some of the bigger stuff like Darkseid or even Crime Syndicate to a degree. I mean, like, there's so many possibilities of what they could do. There's a lot of really good stories out there that they could do. But like Paul said, I think the villains that DC has is what makes them so much different than what Marvel has. I mean, when you look at and I have no problem admitting I have been a DC fan since I was a kid. There's no question that I know way more about the DC universe than I will ever know about Marvel. I just don't have the desire to like start learning everything about Marvel. That's not to say that I haven't watched all of the Marvel movies, that I don't watch Marvel TV shows. It's not to say that I'm not, that I just completely, I am strictly DC and I refuse to watch anything else. It's not like I'm a purist by any means, but at the same point, like, you see what Fox is doing with their X-Men films and the stuff that they're doing with their characters, like with Deadpool and what they did with Logan. And now, the trailer for New Mutants came out and it looks like a straight up horror movie. They're definitely trying different things, and they're basically trying to see how far they can stretch the superhero genre and make unique things. And in some ways, it's working really well for them. Deadpool made a bunch of money. Logan made a bunch of money. we'll see what happens with some of these other ones, but like they're doing different things, and if DC can kind of take risks and experiment with different ways of telling stories like Fox is doing, but then tell different stories from what Marvel's doing, so it's not like they're constantly being compared. That's what's most important for me. I mean, like, I want quality stuff, but I don't want to see necessarily just a reversion of something we've already seen in the past. And I feel like if they did go the dark side route, we would just be getting that. So I'm glad for that. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is there's a couple of controversies that have spun out of Justice League. We're recording this the Sunday after the film came out. It's looking like the report is that the opening weekend for Justice League is going to be sitting right around a total of $185 million internationally. Out of that money, 51 million is coming from China, which is a huge amount. It actually did make a brand new record in one country of note, Brazil. It was the top movie it's the top opening weekend for any movie ever in Brazil, with 14 million. But here in North America, not so much. For whatever reason, over the course of the weekend, it's projected to have only made about $95 million, which some people may consider, or $96 million, which is which some people would classify as not so great. It's definitely not. It's the lowest opening of all of the DC films. It's lower than Wonder Woman. It's lower than Batman vs Superman and Suicide Squad. I believe it's even lower than Man of Steel. Although I can't speak for that for exact certainty. But the reality of it is the question is, we enjoyed the film. The question is, what do you feel? Why do you feel the box office is the way it is? And obviously, the box office could obviously change. It could end up being a little bit higher than what they're anticipating, which is what we're going off of. It could also pick up and do very well because outside of the Disney Pixar movie Coco that's coming out Thanksgiving weekend, there's not a whole lot of big releases in general or movies within the same genres, the superhero films that will be coming out or releasing between now and when Star Wars comes out in December. So the question is, why do you think the box office has been the way it is?
Look, this is something that I find very interesting, and we break box office down quite a lot on Signal of Doom. I think in terms of the North American market, with DC Warners, the films, apart from Wonder Woman, have been very divisive critically and amongst the fan base. And Batman Superman opened huge numbers. It had a huge drop off. That's quite common in movies to have a huge drop off, but it had a huge opening weekend. Now, unfortunately, you get to Justice League, some underwhelming trailers, a change of directors, a sense of confusion over the whole project, the constant reassurances it was going to be full of joy. The trailers pretty much symbolize what we'd expect from the movie. It just, unfortunately, in the North American market, these IPs don't travel as well as they do internationally at the moment. Partly that's perception. The Marvel movies have definitely got the jump on them, and they have a lot more synergy. Audiences just relate to them easier, it seems. So Marvel have an advantage. They have an advantage. They've segmented the market for like 10 years. Nearly all their movies, you look at all the movies, they've all been box office winners. Some movies with smaller budgets have done very well as well for them. They haven't had a flop. Warners haven't had a flop either, but they haven't, apart from Wonder Woman, they haven't had that universal consensus amongst fans and critics and box office. They haven't had sort of the trifecta, although all the movies have made money. There's just a little bit of a stink on them. And I point to, I'll be brutally honest, I think Zack Snyder, I like Zack Snyder's movies like 300, Dawn of the Dead. I enjoyed Watchmen. I haven't really enjoyed his DC vision, and it really is his vision. And they've clearly moved away from that now. They've put out a lot of press releases, Don Nelson and Jeff Johns, about how they've moved away from that vision. I think this is the last remnant of that. And it just hasn't really gelled completely well with audiences. And some of that's down to the movies themselves. Some of that's just perception, which is such a powerful thing when it comes to box office tracking. I've got a feeling that look, Wonder Woman washed a bit of bad taste out of the audience's mouth. This hasn't been a failure, but it hasn't been what they would have been hoping for. This is kind of been somewhere in between. Whedon's come in. He's had to do a bit of damage repair on something that had some serious flaws. Let's hope that James Wan's Aquaman is actually a good movie and makes money. That will help. Wonder Woman 2 will help. We could be in a very different position with DC Warners in like the next 2 years. So box office tracking comes down a lot to perception. And as soon as you have a bad stink on a movie like this does have, it does affect the box office. It's just a reality of life, especially in the North American market. Outside, internationally, the IPs travel better. That's quite common in movies now. You look at Mummy. Mummy's a terrible movie. It did very poorly in the US, but it did very well internationally, ended up generating a profit. And that's quite common for a lot of these movies. The Transformers movies travel better overseas. Pirates travels better overseas. Warners just need to make a few more good movies that do the trifecta of good box office, good audience reaction, and decent critical. Because if you look at Metacritic, like an action movie like Justice League that ends in the 70s is a huge success critically. This is like 40s, which is where it's going to land. So yeah, they need to make better movies, and then the US audience, which seems to be very, very critical and sort of eating itself a little bit. It's becoming less and less of an important player in overall box office, just due to the Chinese market mainly. So yeah, I mean, there's hope for Warner's. This isn't a flop, but it won't be the financial success they were hoping for. It won't crack $1 billion. It'll be lucky to surpass Wonder Woman, which had great word of mouth. It'll land somewhere, if I have to guess, I think it'll land somewhere around 700 million. Somewhere around there overall, which is not what they'd be hoping for. That's my analysis.
I think this movie was always going to be a bit of an uphill battle. I think that Zack Snyder, I think it's clear that his take on things is not what the mainstream audience wants. His vision was a very, very specific take on Superman and on Batman, and it caused a lot of extreme reactions on both sides of the argument. Some people wanted to kill everything he did with fire, and some people thought it was brilliant and never want to see anything else other than his take on things. And then you have this movie, which is the culmination of everything that he was trying to do. So you've got one side of the fans who didn't enjoy the first couple of movies, and then when he leaves for various reasons and another director/writer is brought in to change things, soften things, and bring in the finished product that they had, the extreme Snyder fans are going to have the same reaction where they're like, hey, wait a second, you're changing what we wanted. Kill it with fire. So I think that coupled with critics which didn't love the movie, I think that this was always going to be an uphill battle. I think a lot of people have stayed away and are waiting to see what the word of mouth is before they actually go and see this movie. And so I think that it's starting to come out that, you know what, this is not the same product as Batman versus Superman. It's not as divisive, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if next weekend that we don't see nearly the drop off that we did for something like Batman versus Superman, where you see people who are actually willing to go on out and give this movie a chance. So, and long term, this movie will turn a profit eventually. It's a shame that it didn't do better. But I don't think we can be surprised that not as many people ran out to go see it on opening weekend as one might otherwise expect, because I just think that there was too much negativity, too much controversy for all these movies going back to Man of Steel. And I think that now that Zack Snyder is done, love him or hate him, I think that that's better for the properties going forward, because I think that it removes a lot of the debate if he's not involved going forward on everything that they're trying to do. That's all I got.
Yeah.
I'm no expert. I can't tell.
Yeah, sorry. My mic was muted, and I started talking, forgot that it was muted until you said that. That's all I got. No, so this is what I will say. I definitely agree that the North American market is not becoming as important when it comes to the overall box office take as a lot of other countries, specifically China, is becoming a huge place for movies to make a ton of money. There, in some cases, a movie can basically be made or broken by whether or not it does well in China, and people aren't worrying about necessarily whether or not a movie is doing super well here in the States, as proof as to all of these other movies that have come out this summer, specifically, like you said, David, with the Mummy and Transformers and the Pirates movies. Those movies, none of them did super well here in the States, but they all made plenty of money overseas to still become profitable films. That being said, I honestly feel like this is probably going to end up somewhere in the $600 to $650 or $1 million range when it's all said and done, which, I mean, that's going to put it lower than basically every DC film other than Man of Steel. But I honestly think that that's what's going to happen. And part of it has to do with, I just don't see it making $400 million here in the States. I just don't. There's not enough time between this release and Star Wars coming out for it to make a ton of money before Star Wars comes out. I mean, once Star Wars comes out, I mean, it's done. It's not going to be making a ton of money while Star Wars is out. It's just not. I honestly don't believe that this movie will be in theaters past the beginning of January either. It's never going to happen. Or even before the end of December, depending on how many screens Star Wars takes over. So, and of course, they're going to lose the IMAX screens. They're going to lose a lot of the digital screens with 3D and things like that. So, I just don't see it making as much money as they're probably hoping for. But I definitely agree that this is. I honestly think that Warner Brothers expected this to happen. It didn't feel as if the marketing for the film was as heavy as it potentially could have been. Don't get me wrong. I've seen a million Justice League commercials all over the place. I was trying to stay away from as many TV spots and things like that and clips before the film because there's been a tendency in the past to show too much of the film just in TV spots and in the clips that they release on like the press circuit and things like that. I was trying to stay away from that stuff, but I still saw plenty of commercials. So it's not that they didn't advertise or didn't market the film, but I honestly feel like they probably could have done a ton more if they wanted to. They just didn't because they were expecting the film not to be as profitable as something like Wonder Woman was, because they completely understand that this is, I'm going to phrase it as, this is a transitional film. This is a film where you go from one direction to the new direction that the production company is going towards. DC Films is going in a new direction going forward. Wonder Woman, to a degree, was the beginning of that new direction, and it just happened to release before this movie. But with Zack Snyder out, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective, they're moving in a completely new direction. And I also believe that part of the problem was that this is going to dive into our second controversy that I want to talk about, but it goes, the second controversy out there that's making its rounds on the internet is that there is a lot of hardcore Zack Snyder fans out there who are being extremely vocal about their thoughts on the film and saying that this movie is an utter piece of junk because Joss Whedon was brought on and Joss Whedon did a horrible job, and they're super upset that we are never going to see the final vision of what Zack Snyder intended the film to be, and they're super upset. And I'm not going to, point in any specific direction, but there are some sites out there who have clearly been Zack Snyder fans from the very beginning, who have also gone out there and they're egging some of these stories on by showing things like Joss Whedon saying that he liked some tweet the opening day of the movie saying that the movie was bad and that the villain was a horrible villain. There's sites out there who are talking about how Danny Elfman is super pissed about Hans Zimmer being involved with the Dark Knight trilogy, and that he's super pissed that his score for Batman got changed and was never used for the Dark Knight trilogy. And there's people out there who believe that there should be a specific Ultimate Edition of this movie released by Zack Snyder with his cut, his edits, and the original score/soundtrack that was supposed to be come up with by Junkie XL, who is the composer on Batman vs Superman with Hans Zimmer. And
he's an Aussie too.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like, there's a lot of people. Like, I've been seeing so much of this stuff, and it just comes down to, like, I just don't believe for a moment that long term we could have just put everything on the shoulders of Zack Snyder. And I'm not saying, like, I have no problem saying that, like, I didn't like his direction with some of these other films, but the one thing that I did enjoy was I actually did like Watchmen, his take on Watchmen. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't like the fact that he changed the ending of it from the original comic. I would have preferred the original ending over what he gave us, but I still enjoyed what he gave us, like his like unique style that he does with the slow-mo and the music and all of that stuff. It worked perfectly for Watchmen. When it comes to a character like Batman and you have this desire to focus on a very specific version of Batman, such as The Dark Knight Returns, you're hindering the character. I mean, I was talking with my wife about about Batman's character, and like, if you're starting this story of the DC universe, why would you immediately want to have your Batman as old as Bruce Wayne and make him look as old by giving him gray hair and that stuff? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you're basically starting out at a point where, like, he can only go so far. You cannot sit there and say, we're going to make movies for 10 years and we want Batman to be in his 50s by the time we're done with these films. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm not saying Ben Affleck did a bad job. I like Ben Affleck's take on Batman. It's just, it's one of those things where Ben Affleck maybe could have been a better person if he was 10 years younger, or he wasn't as old, or they weren't making him look as old as he was. And we know that Zack Snyder was going the Dark Knight's Returns route because he used a quote from the book when he announced the film in general, and clearly there's elements from the comic that were put into the film. But it's one of those things where I'm not going to sit here and say that Joss Whedon made the movie a better movie, because I don't really, unless we actually know what he did and what he didn't do, there's no way of knowing. I mean, there's no way of knowing other than we know the direction that Zack Snyder was, his intent was to go. Justice League Part 1, Justice League Part 2, Steppenwolf, Darkseid. That's what he was initially intending to do. They're not going that route. He's out. And the thing is, to a degree, there's also this other part of the controversy, which is, was he kicked out, or was he just asked politely to leave? And I honestly, and I don't say this lightly, but the entire situation that happened in his personal life with his daughter, I honestly believe that might have been used as a reason to push him out by Warner Brothers, because as much as I fully believe that anybody who has family who dies needs to have time to mourn, since he left the film and it was announced that he was leaving the film, ever since he left, he has been active on social media, talking to fans and things like that. And he even produced a short film that released on a social media site since then, before Justice League came out. The fact that he was not involved at all in the promotional aspects of the film, but yet his name is the sole director on the film, leads me to believe that he was pushed out, and they did not leave on good terms. Let's just leave it at that. But I'm pretty sure he was pushed out, and they had no desire to keep him around whatsoever, and he was upset by that. They could have tried to save face by using the situation with his family. That in some ways kind of messed up, but maybe that was Zack Snyder's decision in using that. But it comes down to this, okay? You can like Zack Snyder's take on what he did. You cannot like it. But the reality of it is, I don't know that you should ever put all of your eggs in one basket when it comes to a movie franchise. And with Zack Snyder, it felt as if Warner Brothers initially gave him way too many eggs in his basket, initially, and said you could do whatever you want with these characters. We just want you to make a boatload of money. And eventually it got to the point where Batman vs Superman came out and the movie got trashed, and it didn't make $1 billion like they probably should have, based off of the characters that were in it. And then they realized, wait, we got to step back here. And they let him keep going with Justice League, but it got to a point where they realized they might have just decided to let him go a little too far. So I don't think that any director should have as much control. I mean, like, there's nothing saying a producer, but directors should not be the people who are the ones who have the control on a franchise. It just shouldn't be that way, regardless of whether it's Zack Snyder or anybody else out there. I just don't feel like that's the way it should be.
Well, firstly, Dustin, let me congratulate you on what I feel should be a career in politics after that stump speech.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was quite the monologue, and I very much think you got a stack of great content in there. Now, this is something I actually find quite interesting. Look, I haven't done the internet searches to know that debate's raging, but the fact that it's raging is of absolutely no surprise. I think the thing with Snyder is a very talented filmmaker. He definitely had a vision. He's always struck me, and this just stick with me for this analogy. He struck me as the guy who read Dark Knight Returns, loved it, and I loved it too when I first read it, but then didn't read an awful lot after that. So that's his vision of Batman. That's his vision of the world. It's a very dark, Frank Miller did a very dark take at the time. And it just strikes me that he's that guy. He's that director who's read that. That's kind of his Bible for the characters. And when I first heard it pitched, I was like, man, this is going to be epic. But when it eventually came to the reality of his vision, and he did a great job, I thought, with Watchmen. I mean, yes, it had some flaws, but at least he did a very sterile adaptation that was very note by note. I thought it worked quite well. He did 300. He did Dawn of the Dead. He made some good movies. But when it came to Batman vs. Superman, that's a fundamentally pretty flawed movie, and particularly the cinema cut. And when it came out, despite the money it made at the front end, and it ended up making whatever it made, like I forget the exact figure, but it's somewhere just shy of 800 million? Now, the point was, when that came out, Warners were like, oh my God, this isn't what we were hoping for in terms of like an audience reaction or a box office. And he was already shooting Justice League. And you're 100% right. Zack Snyder had way too much influence with his particular brand of vision on forming a world. He wasn't the right man to universe build for the DC slate. He just wasn't the right guy. To do a movie, sure, but he was charged with actually building it. I mean, he made Man of Steel, which for me still, I know some people love it. I found it one of the most boring movies of all time. And I know the internet went crazy. Mark Waid ran out of a cinema because he broke Superman's neck. For me, that wasn't even the biggest problem. I just found it was a dull movie. And Batman vs. Superman's not dull, but it's flawed. And unfortunately for the studio, he was already shooting Justice League. So his fingerprints are all over it. I think the end result of this movie, unfortunately for those guys, the Snyder fans, I think this is far more of Zack Snyder's movie than people were thinking it would be. I thought Joss Whedon would have a much more conscious influence in this. He probably massaged some scenes, added some character moments. That's his talent. But I didn't feel that this movie screamed out Joss Whedon. I mean, yeah, you can say the obvious things like maybe some of the flash lines, some of the stuff with the Wonder Woman, Batman, I would say is probably his work. But he's very much around the edges. This is a Zack Snyder vehicle, and it's a kind of unformed vehicle as well. Snyder walking away from the franchise, yes, there was the tragedy with his family. Yes, he was probably slightly politically pushed out as well because they were giving him so many notes. But when you look at the final movie, the lean 2-hour runtime, it's a Zack Snyder movie, really, and it's a kind of unformed one as well. The Zack Snyder fanboys are going to have to get over it. He's going to have a long career directing. His career's by no means over. He's a moneymaker for Warner's. I think he's still signed to do more movies with them now. So I think that this was just a marriage that had to end. They couldn't go any further with his vision. They're turning it over to various other directors, doing all the solo properties. Once they get their eggs all together in a basket, they will do another Justice League movie at some point. The Snyder, probably hiring Snyder and giving him, as you said, an older Batman to begin with was probably a mistake, because as soon as you put the grey hair in a villain, or sorry, not a villain, in a hero like Batman, you're kind of predicting their demise. Batman shouldn't have grey hair in the mainstream universe for too long. That's a real problem. There is lots of problems with the way Zack Snyder has built the DC universe, in my opinion. But that's who Warner's hired, and that's who they got. It's no surprise. That was his vision. That's the way he makes his movies. He has a darker sort of palette, very action-based. That's just how he makes his movies, and you would think they would know that. But then his strength is not story. I'm not a particular fan of David Goyer writing all the movies with Chris Terrio. I think they've turned out a lot of stinkers. I think they need to turn it over to fresh writing teams. I've often said, I said on the Signal recently, and I was having a conversation with a couple of guys from other podcasts, that they probably need to get a good Batman writer to do a treatment for Batman and then punch it into a movie script, something like that. But yeah, Snyder's always struck me as the guy who read Dark Knight Returns and thought this is the DC universe, and of course it's not. It's just one particular take. So that's kind of my comments on it.
Well, I think you've both said almost everything, though. I'll try to come up with. I agree. I think read The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, because those were the two big books in the 80s. He was in college. He just kind of, I think that is his world is very much informed by that. And his stuff, he very much, like I said before, he's got a very specific take on how he wants the DC universe to be. And I think that, while I don't think you can blame everything on him or anybody else, movies, so many people work on them, I think that when Batman vs. came out and it turned out to not the hit that they wanted it to be, and all the controversy that caused. If memory serves me, I think they were not including Justice League yet, but they were getting really, really close. I think that they should have ate the money, took a step back, and really looked at what they were doing instead of trying to correct on the fly. And I think that was the problem with what they ended up doing. I think that if they had taken a step back and maybe even replaced the director right there and then, I think we might have a better product than we do now. it's hard to know where Zack Snyder ends and Joss Whedon starts. And I mean, I think we can guess about some of the changes made. I personally think that almost everything that we see Superman in the movie is probably Joss Whedon. I think there's a lot of just the tone of it all. I think is very much in the other things that Joss Whedon has written. And I kind of wonder what the original way. I wonder if the original way that Superman was brought back was something completely different. I mean, there were shots that were leaked out of Superman wearing the black suit. That I think Henry Cavill even shot something on his Instagram about that at one point. So
Correct.
I wonder if there was a completely different plot concerning how Superman came back, and I wonder if most of the stuff that was shot was that. But at the end of the day, I think we're all guessing at this point. I think over the next months and however long, I think it'll come out exactly what was shot then and what was shot earlier. But it's really hard to know at this point. But I think the big issue is that when they realized it wasn't working, they should have kind of stepped back and tried to come up with something different and figure out what the problems were and fix them at the start, as opposed to starting to shoot a movie and kind of fix everything on the fly, because what do you expect to happen as a result of that?
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem with what they did was Batman versus Superman. Like, let's not put any blinders on this. We know that these movies cost millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to make, and we know that Batman vs. Superman came out at the end of March, and it was the middle of April is when they started filming Justice League, and it was just a couple weeks after. You saw how much money it was making. We saw the giant drop that it had after the first weekend. We saw the critic reviews. We saw people bashing it. Even on the last couple of weeks of the press tours that the actors were on, we saw Ben Affleck completely get deflated by by what the critics were saying and things like that. That was sad Affleck. The meme was
I loved it.
Came out from that. I mean, but the reality of it was they knew that there was something wrong. Instead of going straight into production of Justice League and just saying we're going to just keep going with what we're planning, they should have just stopped then and there, knowing that they weren't even going to release the film for another year and a half. They should have taken some more time to maybe come up with a different version of the film, so that way like you both said, and like I said earlier, we have no idea what Joss Whedon did and what he didn't do. And I agree that this was probably 85% of what Snyder intended the film to be. There is probably bits and pieces that were changed and things like that. I'm sure the black suit Superman, something happened with that. A lot of the Superman stuff that ended up being in the final part of the film probably was changed, but I would say the vast majority of this movie is exactly the way Snyder intended for it, because looking at this film, it does feel like a setup for some other film as he originally intended with Justice League Part 2. So I would say that if that was entirely the case, I just there's no way of knowing what was what. And honestly, Zack Snyder's not going to go out there and publicly say right now when the movie's out in theaters that this is what happened. It's going to be some expose interview that he gives way after the fact. I just checked his IMDb as we were sitting there, and he already has a movie that's in pre-production that is not linked to Warner Brothers that he's directing, that probably will be coming out either sometime next year or the year after. Seems like a much smaller film. The description has something to do with it's called The Last Photograph, and has something to do with two people finding a photograph and traveling to war-torn Afghanistan. So it probably is a much lower budget, similar to the way we've seen Michael Bay go from making Transformer movies and be completely ripped apart to making smaller movies like The Lone Survivor and things like that. Or not Lone Survivor. I don't know why I said that. Secrets of Benghazi, or whatever that movie was called.
Was it 13 Hours? Is that the one?
Yeah, 13 Hours. Yes, that's what it was. I'm thinking I was confusing myself with Peter Berg, who also did the exact same thing, where he was making movies and Battleship was horrible, and then all of a sudden he went to making smaller films like Lone Survivor.
Battleship was one of the worst movies of all time.
Yeah. So that being said, maybe he's just going to go down that route of he's going to try to get back to the basics of filmmaking and get back to less CGI films and less big blockbuster massive budget films, and just get back to just making good films, and good for him. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and fault the guy for wanting to do something different after he's been doing all of these movies like 300, Watchmen, Man of Steel. Like, he's done a lot of movies over the years that are massive movies. I mean, and if the critics keep hammering him, he's, makes no sense to keep doing what he's been doing. It makes sense to try to reinvent yourself. It's not like he's an old guy who's, doesn't have a ton of years left to make movies. So that all being said, the final thing I just want to talk about is, I said final thing for the controversies, but I don't want to end on like a bad note with all this negative talk about the controversies. So the last thing I just want to dive into is, we know that Aquaman's coming up. We know that there's a Flashpoint movie. We know that they hinted at Comic-Con. There's a Justice League Dark, a Batgirl film. What are you excited about that's coming from DC Films? We know we're not going to see another DC film in live action form until next Christmas or next winter-ish time with Aquaman. But what are you most excited about seeing that they've announced or that has been hinted at or rumored about? What are you looking forward to based off of what we've seen so far and the direction we're going?
Okay, great question, Dustin. Look, I'm actually really excited for the future of DC Warner's. Okay, so look, I am looking forward to Aquaman. Just for me, I'm not an Aquaman fan, but you know what? I like Jason Momoa. James Wan looks like a really good director. I'm excited for that movie. Just going in, no expectations, like thrill me. Do some world building, like introduce me to the world of Aquaman. I really am looking forward to that. I think that could be a really big piece of the puzzle for Warner's. But a movie I'm looking so forward to is Wonder Woman 2. I'm a huge Wonder Woman fan from the comics, like Greg Rucka's run and other runs I've really, really enjoyed. Wonder Woman Justice League, I think, is so cool. So I'm looking so forward to Wonder Woman 2. I think it's a 2019 release. Hey, look, I know it gets abused, but I enjoyed bits of Suicide Squad, particularly the lead actress in Australian, Margot Robbie as Harley, and obviously Will Smith as Deadshot. So I'm looking forward to what happens there. The potential for Warner's is so confusingly good, and yet the problem is they've released so many films on their slate. Like they're making a Shazam movie. I'm not a huge Shazam fan, but I kind of dig him. So I'm excited to see what that is. We've heard The Rock talk about how he wants to do Black Adam. That excites me. Like they've got so many good characters. Like I honestly think DC have a really, really deep, big character list. Their problem has been their execution. I think now that they've pushed Snyder out of the way and they're going to focus with directors, like, for example, Whedon's doing Batgirl. Now, that sounds great. I don't know when it's coming, though. That's part of the problem. It's hard to be too excited for something that's like 3 or 4 years away. But in stuff that's coming up, like directly that we can see, there's the Flashpoint movie. I'm very, very excited to see what they do there because I think it's going to be huge for the whole universe building. Aquaman excites me, and Wonder Woman 2 is something which I genuinely would love to see, and I hope they do the 80s movie that was rumored, just because I think it sounds cool. And I really like the Gal Gadot walked back that thing about how she was saying the Wonder Woman didn't leave the world for 100 years, which makes me think that she'll have some scenes in the 80s and stuff like that, or 90s, wherever they said it. So overall, I'm really positive. Like in the far distant future, say next 3 or 4 years, I'm looking forward to another Justice League movie. And that's not even mentioning the Batman trilogy. That's probably, we're on the Batman universe. I'm a massive Batman fan. Whatever they do, like let's not forget there's rumors that Jake Gyllenhaal is going to come in, which would make sense to play, Bruce Wayne Batman, maybe spinning out of Flashpoint. So all the things I mentioned, I'm excited by. When I dial into it, the Flashpoint movie, Wonder Woman 2, and the Matt Reeves trilogy are probably on top of my list. And then next year, we've only got one thing. And I personally think it's a mistake from Warner's to only put out one movie next year, but they are, and that's Aquaman. Now, Aquaman better be good for the studio because they need it. And I think it's a mistake. I think they should have more than one movie on their schedule, especially when they announce all this stuff. Well, why hasn't that sort of, why isn't that sort of been put into production? And something that frustrates me is I saw a report recently they don't even have a plan yet for Man of Steel 2 or Superman, whatever you want to call it. I find it curious that they haven't developed a plan for where to take Superman because he's a huge linchpin. I mean, you could potentially make Superman movies that make massive money as well. So, and you could have, do things like, my thoughts are something like Wonder Woman, I would actually bring in like a little segue from Batman or something, not to steal the movie, but I would do a bit of universe building in the solo movies too. You don't need to have the whole Justice League turn up. You can have little team-ups inside the movies. So, I'm excited for a whole stack of stuff, really, but it's how it translates is kind of where we'll see,
The big thing that I'm excited about would have to be Matt Reeves' Batman movies, whatever he's got cooking up. I think the writing's on the wall. I don't think Ben Affleck coming back as Batman. I think that we're going to be getting Jake Gyllenhaal or somebody else. We're going to be getting a new actor. I just hope that they don't address anything. They don't try to work up a story reason why he looks different. Just it's Batman. It's a different actor playing it. We've seen that happen tons of times now. In this franchise and other franchises, recasting happens. So I'd say at this point, just if he's not coming back, then just recast him and move on. I like the rumors I've heard about it being a more of a crime story or a detective story, and I'm really excited to see what they are planning with that, because Matt Reeves' stuff that I've seen, the Apes movies that I've seen, he's a great director. So I'm really curious to see. I figure we're not going to get any kind of an announcement on that on those movies for a bit, but I'm really curious to see what's going on. It's definitely what I'm looking forward to the most. I'm also looking forward to Nightwing's in development, Batgirl's in development. And really, after that end scene in Justice League, I'm really, really excited for them to do something with the Injustice Gang. Like that last scene in Justice League, do that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with a lot of what you guys said. I'm most excited about probably the Matt Reeves thing. If you listen to the Comic Cast, you know that I have been loving the Planet of the Apes films, and it just so happens that the last two Planet of the Apes films were both filmed by Matt Reeves. He was the director. So trust me when I say War for the Planet of the Apes was, I honestly would say, was my favorite movie of 2017, hands down. That's me personally, but I'm really, and that was, and I went in that movie thinking, man, I really hope this is good. I really enjoyed Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, but I was really just walking into it hoping that it was going to be amazing, and it did not disappoint me whatsoever. But anyway, I'm looking forward to that. I also agree that that Ben Affleck will most likely not be in Matt Reeves' trilogy. I'm sure Ben Affleck would love to do it, but the reality of it is he's getting up there in age. If Matt Reeves is planning on doing a trilogy, that's going to take at least 9 to 12 years to put together. And I don't think Ben Affleck is going to be wanting to be pushing his mid 50s or upper 50s and be looking at still doing Batman films. I just don't see it happening. I disagree with the idea that there is not going to be a story element that's going to explain how he gets de-aged. I honestly feel they're going to use Flashpoint as the way to de-age Batman, just so that he's in the same age range as Superman, so that he's not so much older. And I doubt we will see, and I have no problem saying I doubt we will see any Batman, Batgirl, Nightwing, any of those films until after Flashpoint happens, specifically because Flashpoint's going to be used to explain a bunch of different things. I could see Flashpoint being used to explain the retcon of Wonder Woman to a degree, depending on when Flashpoint ends up actually releasing.
Does it have a release date, Dustin? Do we have a release date on Flashpoint yet?
No, we do not. Initially, Flash was the other movie that was supposed to come out in 2018. It was supposed to be Flash sometime in the spring. Aquaman was in the winter. That's the way it originally was planned. And then Flash lost its director twice. And then I think it was the last time it happened was because they were going in a direction. I think it clashed with what the studio wanted. And then they decided they were going to go in a completely different direction because of trying to. And I truly believe that Flashpoint is going to be the explanation of a lot of things that Snyder did to be undone. I have no.
That's clever, though. It's very clever.
And I've seen a lot of people say, no, Flashpoint's not going to do that. It's not going to change things. They're just going to recast Batman. I don't agree with that. I honestly believe that Flashpoint, there's no reason to do Flashpoint unless it's going to change or retcon things. There's no reason to. You don't come
I 100%
out of
agree with you, Dustin. I think they're going to,
You don't come out of Flashpoint as a basic crisis level event in the comics and decide we're not going to change stuff. There's just no way you do it. So the best thing to do is to easily explain the de-aging of Batman, then the introduction of all of his other characters that we know that there's films being made like Nightwing and Batgirl, which both have films in production. That they're in production right now, or not in production. They're in the early stages of being created. Let's just put it that way.
Pre-production.
Pre-production.
But I think you're 1,000% right. Like Jeff Johns just the other day was reported to make a comment that Flashpoint will deal with the Batman side of things.
Yeah. I mean, and you also
how more simple does he have to spell it out for people? Like it makes sense, you know?
Yeah, and you don't tell the Flashpoint story without dealing with that Bruce Wayne, Thomas Wayne aspect. You just don't. So the best thing to do is to have Ben Affleck have his third film as part of the Flashpoint story, and then you just go from there. And then Ben Affleck gets de-aged. Jake Gyllenhaal, I could easily say he could pass as a 10-year younger version of Ben Affleck if they wanted to go that route. It's not like the writing's there. It's just it's like people don't want to connect it because they think it's too far fetched, and I don't think it's too far out there. I mean,
I think it's quite likely to happen, just like what you're saying.
I think if they de-age him and they decide then to recast at some other point, I guarantee you whatever actor they get is going to be signed on for all three of Matt Reeves' films and is going to be Batman for all of those films and potentially future films. I'm sure they'll have bigger contracts. I mean, the big thing is when you look at who they've cast as Wonder Woman, Superman, Flash, Cyborg, these are not humongous names. Sure, Henry Cavill is getting bigger roles and things like that. Wonder Woman's got more roles, but when they were initially cast, these were not big name actors. Even Ray Fisher and Ezra Miller and Jason Momoa, none of them are like huge names. So
they're not A-listers.
Exactly. So they can easily be signed on for humongous contracts to be doing these films for a very long period of time. Ben Affleck is the odd man out. It feels as if he was brought in to basically put a selling point on the movie that otherwise would have a bunch of earlier, not as big name actors. So the best thing to do is, if Ben Affleck is the odd man out, why not bring somebody in who, is not necessarily as popular as him, who they could get to sign a contract for 10 years or whatever, however they want to work that. That makes more sense to me. But outside of that, I'd love to see the Injustice League come to fruition, however that may be. I'm super looking forward to basically all these movies that they keep, that are out there that just keep it's amazing because I remember at San Diego Comic-Con, Jeff Johns said this. He made some comment in an interview that said, yeah, well, the Batman universe is central to the entire DC universe. So why wouldn't we want to expand the movies that we're producing with the characters from the Batman universe? And that includes Joss Whedon's Batgirl, Chris McKay's Nightwing, David Ayer is going to be doing Gotham City Sirens, Matt Reeves' Batman trilogy. I mean, I'm super looking forward to so many Batman universe projects. That's what super excites me. But on top of that, outside of the Batman stuff, like Flashpoint's going to be great because I definitely see the direction they're going with it. Aquaman, when they showed footage at Comic-Con and it was described online as a space odyssey underwater, I was like, that's a pretty cool description that I don't think I would have ever thought of using to describe something. And the fact that James Wan has been talking on Twitter about how he wanted to be very practical. He needed to figure out exactly how to do things underwater, film things underwater. I'm really excited to see what ends up coming out of that. Definitely Wonder Woman 2. Shazam to a degree because I think it's going to be a different take. It's definitely going to be a version of the DC universe. It's going to be lighter in tone based off of who they've got as the director, the cast that they've already announced. It's definitely going to be a lighter film. But in general, there's so much stuff out there that they could do. And that's what excites me probably the most is that there's the potential is insane. Like when you look at the Marvel universe and you see what they've been doing over the last 10 years, they've been doing a great job and they've been doing great. And they've recently figured out ways to expand outside of the core members of the Avengers and things like that. And they're doing more. And I just think to myself, if Warner Brothers can get to the success that Marvel has had, to where they're producing, 2-3 films a year and they're good films and they're different takes on the characters, let me rephrase that. When I say different takes, I mean like different tones and themes and genre takes on some of these characters. That would be really cool. I would love to see that happen. I mean, the ultimate thing is I'm a DC fan. I want to see as many DC films as I can without it just being the same old every single time I go see a film. And with the direction that they seem to be going with some of the films that are immediately on the horizon, it definitely feels like that's the direction they're taking. So I'm looking for, and I've got high hopes. I mean, Justice League might not blow box office numbers, but this is in my opinion, a transitional film, and we're going to be getting a completely different DC universe going forward. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
That's very well said, Dustin. I very much echo what you're saying there. I think the one thing I will say is I 100% agree with you, especially on the potential, because they've got such a mine of just beautiful characters and stories. I wonder why there's only one DC movie coming out next year. It would have made a lot of sense to maybe do Flashpoint next year as well, just to get this really cart in motion sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at I think it just comes down to the slate they had initially. Like I said, initially had Flash, and they were meant to have 2, and then eventually I think 2019 was the beginning of 3 per year. With the addition of Shazam, was because originally 2019 was supposed to be Justice League Part 2, Shazam, and I can't remember what the other one was.
Maybe it was a Batman, and then that was moved back because originally, don't remember, Affleck was supposed to be directing and writing.
Oh yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it probably was the Batman, and then I remember 2020 was supposed to be Green Lantern Corps and Cyborg. I remember that distinctly, and that's as far as they went with the initial announcement of the slate. Flash, I honestly think that the whole reason the Flash thing fell apart was they realized last year that they needed to go in a different direction and they needed to reset stuff. Jeff Johns was brought in with John Berg as overseers of the DC films, and I think when they got brought in, they thought, hey, well, what if we just did Flashpoint, and that was a way to distance ourselves, or at least put in a different version of some of these characters to distance ourselves from some of the stuff that hasn't been as successful. So
I think it'll be really I think it'll be really telling over the next few months to see what gets announced, what gets greenlit. I think that if Flashpoint is going to be used to reset things, I think that we're going to see an announcement really, really, really soon about that. If Matt Reeves' Batman movie and some of the more solo projects, if they get pushed forward, I think that's also going to be equally telling, because I don't think that they're going to, like, let's say, for instance, if Affleck doesn't come back, I don't think that they're going to shoot a Batman movie with a new actor and then go back and address anything. That's where you would see a scenario where it's not so much of a reset. They're just...
Yeah. All right. Well, I have to say I definitely didn't think we were going to be talking for this long, but I think it was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, guys. Thank you.
All right. So those of you who are listening from wherever you are listening, obviously, if you are listening to this, you have been able to find us. But this podcast released as part of the BatmanUniverse.net. Over on the BatmanUniverse.net, we review comics, and we also report news related to movies, TV, merchandise, video games, and, of course, the comics. We also have a ton of podcasts that we offer on a weekly basis. Some release every other week, some release once a month, but we have tons of podcasts. So be sure to head over to the website, thebatmanuniverse.net, to check out everything that we have to offer. We review all of the comics related to the Batman universe and characters that appear in the Batman universe. We review those over on the site on a weekly basis. So if you are interested in anything related to the Batman universe, be sure to head over to the BatmanUniverse.net. I want to thank David and Paul. Listen to David's podcast, The Signal of Doom. It's out there. And those
it both sure is.
Yes, and both of my hosts for this episode both review comics over on the site as well. So be sure to check out their work on the site. So with that is everything for this episode. This is Dustin.
This is David.
And this is Paul.
You've been listening to the Batman Universe Specials. We'll see you guys next time.